Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no coal. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, we talk to Srah Jaffe, labor reporter in New Orleans, Louisiana, about recent wins for workers in the city, and Robin Hayden, executive director of Alabama Arise, about how the cuts to the federal government are going to affect the state of Alabama. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number. You can give us a call and leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We'll be taking calls in the second half of the program at about noon Central, particularly with an interest in hearing from federal workers. We'll be talking more about the assault on federal workers in the second half of the program, and would love to hear from affected federal workers. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm. But we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining member, sustaining donor to the program, or just make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We have a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. We have our logo dad cap and union-made matchbooks. So get those while you can. And finally, if you're a member of a union, then think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details on that.
Hey y'all, let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, WGOW, WLWI, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a couple diehard union brothers who want to amplify the voices of the working class here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're a loyal fan or first-time listener. We really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Absolutely. And we already have over 30 people watching us live on YouTube right now, but only 10 people have liked the stream. If you haven't liked the stream, go ahead and do that. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us in the chat. Amanda says, good morning, solidarity to the workers. B18 Turner says, you're doing God's work, educating folks in a hostile place. For folks with normal politics like you, I commend your bravery. Appreciate it. Thank you. It is really cool being on the radio in so many different places. Alabama, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Tennessee. Two of those being conservative radio stations, one being a country music station, one black news and soul station, and two progressive community radio stations. So pretty diverse audience just on the radio, and it's exciting. I appreciate, that's why we wanted to be on the radio. We didn't want to just talk to folks who already agreed with us. Nope says, hiya fam. Quirky Geek Girl says, good morning from Toronto. Sad to hear about the utilities funding cut in Alabama. It really sucks indeed. We'll talk about that later. Also, I'm really worried about the auto industry. It's going to be bad. Yeah, I'm anticipating that as well. Claydonia says, good morning. John says, loan me $5. Not sure exactly what the reference is there. Mobin Grunder says, listening while I do my mail route. Thank you for listening. Henry says, good morning from Sarasota. Thank you. DL Cindero says, peace, comrades and fellow workers. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Let's jump right into last week in Southern labor. Here's what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from February 7th to the 14th. This segment is truncated, as is normal these days. You can get the full last week in Southern labor in our newsletter. You can subscribe at TVLR.fm. In new union campaigns, workers at an HBCU in Florida, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical Universities, FAMU, informed the university that they had unionized with the United Campus Workers, UCW-CWA Local 3821. Workers at Mosaic Family Services, a nonprofit serving domestic violence and human rights abuse survivors, requested voluntary recognition of their unionization with the Office and Professional Employees International Union, OPEIU Local 277. That's the same union that recently unionized workers at the International Rescue Committee. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 14 workers at BWXT Nuclear Operations Group in Lynchburg, Virginia, demonstrated support for unionization with the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers. 7 workers at Impanola in New Orleans, Louisiana, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters Local 270, as did 6 more workers at another location in the same city. 28 workers at Entergy in Jackson, Mississippi, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW Local 605. The employer filed a petition to hold a union election after a majority of the 18 workers at United Insurance Company of America in Beaumont, Texas, demonstrated support for unionization with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW. 12 workers at Breakthrough Beverage in Virginia Beach, Virginia, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 822. 17 workers at Pardue Masonry of Central Florida in Tampa, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, IUBAC, Local 8. In election results, 93 workers at a National Transit in Atlanta, Georgia, withdrew a petition for a union election with the Teamsters, Local 728. 49 workers at Rhino Staging in Nashville, Tennessee, withdrew their petition for a union election with the Independent Union, Appalachian Concert Riggers Union. 19 workers at Molzer Crushed Stone in Owensboro, Kentucky, voted 13-5 in favor of unionization with the Central Midwest Regional Council of the International Brotherhood of Carpenters, IBC. 5 workers at Lakeshore Recycling Systems in Mayflower, Arkansas, voted 3-1 in favor of unionization with the Teamsters, Local 373. 72 workers at Norion Functional Chemicals in LaPorte, Texas, voted 42-74 against decertifying their union, meaning the United Steelworkers USW remains. 19 workers at Cargill in Kansas City, Missouri, voted 5-14 in favor of decertifying their union, meaning USW Local 617 is no longer their collective bargaining representative. 7 workers at Joe Hudson's Collision Center in St. Robert, Missouri, voted 6-1 in favor of unionization with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW, District Lodge 9. 26 workers at E.N. Bisso & Son Towing in New Orleans, Louisiana, voted 10-13 against unionization with the American Maritime Officers, AMO. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, this is not the South, but was too fascinating not to share. The Trump-appointed NLRB General Counsel is seeking a CMEX bargaining order to require Wells Fargo to bargain with a union in California, even though the union lost the election because Wells Fargo so egregiously violated the law during the election. Before you get too excited, though, the same General Counsel rescinded a slew of Abruzzo directives, including the CMEX one, so I'm not exactly sure what to make of that. In strikes and bargaining updates, nurses at New Orleans, Louisiana's University Medical Center went back to work after a 2-day strike and a 3-day lockout. Donald Trump continued his attack on America's civil servants by laying off thousands of probationary workers. In the layoff notices, they typically mention performance, but there is no evidence that these thousands of civil servants were performing poorly. Contrary to popular understanding, even probationary employees within the federal government must be fired for cause. Federal unions like the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, are challenging the firings. Here are some of the terminated positions: between 1,200 and 2,000 workers at the Department of Energy, including a professional colleague of mine, and including employees at a power grid office, the Nuclear Security Administration National Labs, hydroelectric plants, and Cold War legacy nuclear sites. After issuing these layoffs, they rescinded some of the ones at the National Nuclear Security Administration. The Departments of Veterans Affairs dismissed more than 1,000 employees as well, and there were several more, but I'll leave it at that. The Teamsters are announcing the details of their tentative agreement with Costco as those members prepare to vote on whether or not to ratify the contract. The agreement includes a $3 an hour wage increase, 6 weeks of paid leave for 30-year employees, and stronger discharge protections and more. Teamsters at Hertz, who had been on strike at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in Texas and Palm Beach International Airport in Florida, voted to end their strikes and ratify new collective bargaining agreements. 555 Teamsters at Danone in Verona, Virginia, voted to ratify a new contract that includes major wage increases, pension contributions, and reduced health care costs, according to the union. Orange County, Florida schools become one of the only in the state of Florida to offer maternity leave this year, thanks to the efforts of the union there. In political and legislative updates, hundreds of Alabama residents received a notice that due to Trump's suspension of a Biden-era grant to deal with high energy prices for low-income folks, their utility bill would be increased by $100 a month beginning immediately. A bill to bring a casino to Fairfax County, Virginia, along with 5,000 good-paying union jobs, has been killed. The effort was strongly supported by unions and has many in Virginia labor discussing openly how they will be interacting with politicians that got elected backed on the back of union support but voted against this union-backed initiative to bring 5,000 good-paying union jobs to the district. The Missouri Attorney General is suing Starbucks because it does not have enough white male baristas. In a just really frankly disgusting display, the Teamsters Union is, quote, applauding, I kid you not, applauding the selection of David Keeling to lead the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Keeling was head of safety, the head safety executive at Amazon, as the company saw a higher than industry average injury rate in the warehouse industry, and as the company allegedly hid safety data, according to a recent U.S. Senate probe. The Teamsters noted that Keeling used to work as a part-time package handler at UPS, but as one Teamster noted on Twitter, I remember when we used to talk crap about union members going into management. The National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers rallied to protest the closure of the Department of Education. This is notably a different stance than Weingarten at the AFT was taking previously. She previously said she did not mind whether the department existed or not. Julia Love spoke with 10 undocumented immigrants who work for Tesla and SpaceX in Texas, including one 50-year-old woman working for a cleaning subcontractor for $16 an hour at Tesla for the richest person in the world, let's remember. You can read the piece in Bloomberg. The official government website for Doge, a commission run by ostensible experts, actually racist teenagers, is insecure and can be edited by anyone, at least as of last week. New DoD Secretary Pete Hegseth issued new guidance barring the use of project labor agreements on DoD construction projects, including seeking to remove ones that they already agreed to. Trump's move to freeze foreign aid has stranded hundreds of millions of dollars of life-saving medical supplies, leaving them at risk of expiration, theft, and damage. Trump looks poised to make it easier for banks to charge consumers high overdraft fees and to make medical debt be listed on credit reports again, as he sets his sights on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and reversing consumer protection rules that the Bureau made last year. In internal union affairs, the IBEW has a really cool report on how they're encouraging locals to expand apprenticeship programs. If we missed something, let us know at tvlr.fm/contact. We're going to take a break really quick, and we'll be right back to talk to Sarah Jaffe about wins for workers in New Orleans.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit NALC.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you have anything to add, you can give us a call or send us a voicemail. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can leave us a voicemail at any time. We'll be opening the phone lines in the second half of the program. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Lots of folks on the YouTube now. Really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to hopefully hearing from a lot of federal workers in the second half of the program. So please do either stick around or come back around noon to give us a call if you're a federal worker. When I come back from break, one of the things that I like to say is that labor creates all wealth, and there was a hearing last week in the Connecticut state government about a bill that would allow striking workers to receive unemployment benefits, and a person that I am acquainted with. I think I would call her a friend of the show, but I don't know. I think she's been on the show before. I think she has. Vale, a UAW staffer, in the Northeast, spoke at this hearing, and the question was about, I think, ostensibly, why should workers who go on strike receive unemployment benefits, presumably because, they decide to go on strike or whatever, and also because in Connecticut, the tax comes from the profits of corporations. And so the question was presumably put something like, well, the corporations are the ones paying the tax, so why should the workers benefit from it? And Vail had an excellent response where she laid it out quite clearly, and the politician was very confused, but not because of Vail. Let's listen to her testimony at the in front of the Connecticut government.
To utilize the unemployment benefits that you've paid into. Can you clarify, is that what you meant to say? Did I hear that right or incorrectly? For you,
well, I believe that the labor that we do as union members generates the profits that go into the unemployment benefit system.
Okay, so you're stating that the labor that you provide that goes into the profits that then become taxed at the corporation level. Okay, I'll try to process that, but thank you. I just want to be clear that the corporation or business or organization is the entity that ultimately pays the tax, and that's how that unemployment compensation fund is.
Yes, I understand, and I believe that the wealth generated for these corporations is generated by our labor.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know why that's so interesting. It seems...
Yes, it's very freaking clear. It's obvious what she's saying. And if you have a question about it, or if you don't agree, then put forward the argument that disputes that assertion. And here's a little thought experiment for you about how you can arrive at the fact that labor creates wealth. This is actually just a science experiment. You can go and do this like in the wild, okay? Take like just a big stack of money. Just take a big stack of money and go and bury it, okay? And then come back and see how much more money or capital or wealth has been created by the wealth and capital that you sat in the wild, okay? So you can go and do this over any amount of time that you want. And you can call into the show at 844-899-TVLR and let us know how much money and capital and wealth is created by this pile of money that you put in the woods. And I would be interested if it is anything other than $0. Okay? But here's the second part of this experiment. You can go to, you can go and put a person in the wild, put them in the woods, and see if they create anything of value. Maybe are they able to create some sort of dwelling? Are they able to do something to make their lives a little bit better? The answer to that question is obviously yes. So there you go. Labor is what creates wealth. Capital does not create wealth. Capital is just dead labor. Labor creates wealth. Capital does not create wealth. It's very, very simple. And so labor is entitled to what it creates. Very simple. So really cool testimony there from UAW staffer Vail in Connecticut. And maybe everybody will be able to see the light from that very simple testimony. We have Sarah Jaffe in the Zoom now. Sarah Jaffe is a writer and reporter living in New Orleans. She is the author of Work Won't Love You Back, How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. Also, Necessary Trouble, Americans in Revolt. And finally, the recently released From the Ashes, Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire. Her journalism covers the politics of power from the workplace to the streets, and her writing has been published in The Nation, The Washington Post, The Guardian, The New Republic, The New York Review of Books, and many other outlets. She's a columnist at The Progressive and a contributing writer at In These Times. Sarah, Welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Hello again. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you back. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a lot of bad news right now. And
Just a little.
we're going to talk about a whole lot of it today. But I think especially in times like this, it's really important to shine a light on everyday people who are taking action collectively, both to resist and to advance. So let's start with what's going on in New Orleans, where you're based, where we air on the radio, thanks to our friends at WHIV. Can you talk to us about some of the exciting organizing that's been happening down there in New Orleans recently?
Yeah. So one of the things that's been really exciting is the National Nurses United is organizing the nurses at University Medical Center. And so University Medical Center has a interesting history in New Orleans. We used to have what they called Charity Hospital, which was an open access hospital for anybody who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay. You know, those things we don't have much of in this country. And after Hurricane Katrina, the original Charity Hospital building was never reopened. It was sort of folded into University Medical Center, which is run actually by Louisiana State University, technically, but it's a private hospital with public funds. You know how that stuff goes, right? Like all of the wealth that we create, as Jacob was saying, that's taken away from us by the state is funded into something and then funneled into somebody else's pockets that had very little to do with creating it. And so those nurses who work at a hospital like this, that is still an open access hospital, that is still there for whoever needs it, that was, among other things, the first place that people were taken after the attack that happened on Bourbon Street on early New Year's Day, technically. You know, they work in hospitals like this because they care about it, because they believe in supporting the people, because they not only, I mean, all nurses, all healthcare professionals, right, go into this because they want to help people, but particularly if you choose to work in this kind of public facility in the US, it is usually the place that treats the poorest of the poor. It's the place that treats people who are incarcerated or who are going to be. It's often even more underfunded than most hospitals. And these workers are sick and tired of being asked to do more with less. I mean, it's a familiar story. But I think the charity hospital angle on it gives us a little bit more of an insight into why these nurses are fed up and are, you know, organizing. And they're, according to the NNU folks that I've spoken to, just one of many hospitals that are organizing across the South right now. So I think this is exciting in general. And here in New Orleans, it sort of means a lot to people like me who want to see healthcare accessible to everyone. And, you know, we're a city that just hosted the Super Bowl, but also still really poor. And so it's important to these nurses, it's important to me, it's important to most people in the city to fight for that kind of access, you know? So that's one thing. I could talk about more if you want, but I've been rambling for a minute. So
No, well, I was going to absolutely bring up the NNU struggle because it's been really exciting to see nurses organizing across the South. And I know, you know, they've had success in Austin, in North Carolina, and, you know, spreading to New Orleans is really exciting. I know you wrote a piece recently for In These Times about the strike that happened leading up to the Super Bowl. We just mentioned it in last week in Southern Labor. So catch us up. What's the latest right now with the nurses at University Medical Center?
Well, they are back at work after, as often happens with nurses' strikes, right? They declared a 2-day strike and then the hospital turned around and locked them out for the next 3 days because they have to pay for the replacement labor force for 5 days. So they're back at work. They're back in, they're attempting to be back in bargaining anyway. And we'll see. But again, as usual, right? The hospital's been dragging its feet on a variety of their different demands, which are mostly, again, for things that involve patient safety, staffing ratios, proper equipment, proper protective equipment, rest time. You know, when I spoke to some of the folks who had worked the night of the Bourbon Street attack, they were saying, like, you know, nurses are trying to come in and they're telling them no. People are trying to come in and help. And they're just, you know, and they do their best, but we're working flat out for hours and hours and hours. And that inability to rest, I think about this a lot in nursing because years ago, Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez from the New York State Nurses Association said to me, you know, the hospitals are cracking down on anything that they call non-productive time. And it's like, it's a hospital. What's the production? You
Right.
know? But it just shows you how the sort of the mindset of private capital accumulation creeps into even public sector hospitals.
Yeah, that is really something interesting to think about because I'm thinking about our interview recently, a few weeks ago, with Amazon workers in North Carolina who are currently organizing, and some of the dystopian conditions they described, the surveillance they described inside the facility. And it is really disturbing how these sorts of trends are spreading across industries and even in industries where, the workers are quote unquote professionals, very educated, doing high demand jobs, right? So I think that is definitely a story here. And I also am really interested in this worker bill of rights. You
Yeah.
wrote recently about that. It was some welcome good news. When I saw your article, I needed some good news that day, so that was really exciting. And we talk about local and state politics a lot on this show because we recognize we see the difficulties in trying to push uphill often when it comes to DC, but the more local the struggle, the more opportunity your relationships have to really bring power to the situation. So we really were excited to hear about this. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Workers' Bill of Rights in New Orleans and how that came to be?
Yeah, I think it's particularly of interest, right, to other folks across the South because a lot of us are in so-called preemption states, right, where the state government has already ruled that locals, that cities and counties can't do much to improve the working conditions of the folks who live there. So they specifically sort of worked on creating this Bill of Rights in a way that would not run afoul of these already existing preemption laws that preempt raising the minimum wage or requiring health insurance or anything like that. So instead, they sort of designed an opt-in program almost that would be something that businesses that choose to give their workers a $15 minimum wage, give their workers health insurance and paid sick time, that would be something that you get promoted for, right? That the city says, oh, look at all these model businesses that you could maybe have, like, how when you walk into a restaurant, there's the food grade rating, whatever thing from the health inspector.
Right.
It's like A, B, C. You want it to be A, right? Because when you walk into a restaurant, and you see a C, you're like, ooh, there might be rats in my hamburger. But similarly, right? We should think about are the workers at this place coming to work sick? I don't want rats in my hamburger, but I also don't want bird flu in my hamburger or, COVID in my hamburger, right? You don't want people sneezing on your food if they have to work sick. And that happens a lot in the service industry. New Orleans is a service industry town, and we get a lot of visitors from all around the country and all around the world in places where workers are allowed to have rights. And I think a lot of those visitors, and this is what the people who design the Workers' Bill of Rights are betting on, a lot of those people want to think that the workers that they're patronizing are being treated fairly, right? They want to think that people have paid sick time. I mean, when I talk to people outside the US, they're always stunned that we don't have any paid sick time or paid family leave or any of those things, right? So having a way to publicize this, it's sort of a carrot rather than a stick program because we're not allowed to have any sticks. But it's, and this was the brainchild of the folks at Step Up Louisiana, which is a community and worker organizing group here that has done a bunch of work organizing dollar store workers, among others. And they really talked to the workers in the community, workers that they had been organizing, but also broadly across the city, did a real mass canvassing program to talk about this because it was a referendum that was on the bill, but the referendum on the bill was pretty vague. It was like, we instantiate workers' rights in the city charter, right? But what that actually looks like is a program that gets passed. The canvassing program was not only a way to get people to vote for it, and 80% of the voters of the city voted for it, but also to say, what do you need? What would be helpful for you to be in this thing as we roll it out, as we try to implement it? What kinds of things do people in New Orleans need?
That is really, really interesting. I love the creative approach around preemption because that's something we're very familiar with here in Alabama. Years ago, some of my earliest activism was around raising the minimum wage. And the city of Birmingham did raise the minimum wage. We had campaigns here in Huntsville, Tuscaloosa, Mobile, across the state. We were gaining momentum, and the state legislature promptly banned us from doing any of that. Right, and we've seen expansions of those kinds of preemptive attacks from these small government conservatives, mind you. They believe in small government, but not home rule for local cities that they don't like. But that's a fascinating approach. You know, if you don't have a stick, use a carrot, and particularly leaning on some of the unique aspects of New Orleans as a very tourist centric place and has a lot of visitors, like you said. And that does spark for me something I know Hamilton Nolan has written about as well, which is, you know, the way the tourist industry and the service economy and things like sports arenas, the way those could be strategic workplaces and strategic industries to organize. And I think Unite Here has had a lot of growth and success in New Orleans, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a service industry town, right? It's one of the things that I think is interesting that nobody has allowed me to write about so far is the fact that it's one of the few places that successfully regulated Airbnb. So I am sitting in my apartment, which is in the French Quarter, which is a little one-bedroom apartment. And it was so clearly a short-term rental at one point that there's actually a punch code on my door, so I don't need a key to get in. So clearly, right, this was something that you were renting out on the weekly, maybe during carnival season. And now I get it for a reasonable price. And actually rents have gone down in this area because they banned Airbnb in the French Quarter. And some of the reason you get that is effective housing activism, but also the hotels have an interest in banning Airbnb. And so you get weird coalitions like that. But can you use those hotels, again, which are really powerful in the city, if you can unionize them, what can you do with that, right? That there are casinos, there are, these big event venues, the convention center, the Superdome, obviously. We just had the damn Super Bowl here. They repaved my street finally after, 5 years because the Super Bowl was coming. So, you see these things, and it's been interesting, right? Because of course we had this attack on New Year's Day. Then we had immediately after that, the Sugar Bowl, then the Super Bowl, and now it's Mardi Gras season. And you see the focus always turn to the tourists. What are the tourists going to think? So our governor, Jeff Landry, in his infinite wisdom, did a sweep of all the unhoused folks in New Orleans. And we had, even when I lived here 20 odd years ago, we would have a decent amount of unhoused people because it's warm and you can sleep on the street without freezing to death.
Right.
Which is a depressing reason, but it's true. And it's only gone up because it's gone up across the US, right? The amount of people who don't have homes is just unconscionable. And so Jeff Landry's solution to this problem was just to clear out the tent cities, move people into a literal warehouse where they still are. And I think something like 12 of the hundreds of people that they've deported into this, warehouse that is far away from the center of the city, people who don't have transport. We don't have a functional public transit system in this city. So, you're basically trapped. 12 of those people have found homes and everybody else is just stuck in a damn warehouse. And one of the nurses I spoke to was saying that a couple of her patients from the Bourbon Street attack are now in that warehouse and can't get their treatment. So it's, it all connects, but it's just a reminder of how little the city values the people who actually live here and how much it values outside tourist dollars. So, as we look around sort of surviving the Super Bowl and moving into what's going to be an incredibly heavily policed carnival season, I think a lot of us are thinking about how do we make New Orleans better for the people who live and work here? Because again, those people who work in the service industry, who work in those hotels, these restaurants, these bars, those are the people who make these tourist events accessible and exciting for people to come in from all over the country and the world.
Exactly. Without these workers, there is no, there just is no New Orleans like we imagine it. So it's been really cool to see New Orleans, the union growth there, the energy. I'm really hopeful about this mass canvassing and the amount of connections and conversations that took place there. You mentioned, in terms of struggles being connected, I think that's a good place to pivot to your new book, From the Ashes, Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire. So you weave together, personal memoir and in-depth reporting to explore the intersection of grief and organizing for positive social change. So just to kind of get us started on that, why write this book? And what are you hoping readers try to get out of this?
Yeah, I wrote this book because when my father died in 2018, and we were not particularly close, did not see each other that often, I was really stunned at how much it upended my life. And I started to see grief everywhere, right? So I'd already been reporting on social movements, on labor for, 10, 15 years at that point. But suddenly it lent a whole new angle to all of these stories that I was looking at. So I started thinking about like the grief inherent in immigration, right? And leaving behind everything you know to come to someplace new, in factory closures. I had been doing a lot of stories in the first Trump era on deindustrialization, on the ways that was, the too cheap story of the rise of Donald Trump was it was, disaffected former factory workers in the Midwest. But to whatever degree there was truth in that, I was spending a lot of time hanging out with former factory workers in the Midwest, or once and again factory workers in the Midwest, as it might be. And obviously the movement for Black Lives, obviously COVID. In the middle of writing this book, there started to be a genocide in Palestine, so I had to write about that. And then, of course, I had to wrap it up with climate change and I talk a lot about climate grief as if it's something anticipatory, but I really wanted to talk to people who had already been through it. And again, living in New Orleans, I am, living in post-Katrina New Orleans, living around a lot of people who are grieving massive losses due to climate crisis. So that's the book, that's the shape of the book. And within it, I talk to people the way I find people, as always, through their organizing. So I talk to people who are organizing around COVID, and I talk to people who are organizing around factory closures, and I talk to UAW folks after the big strike in 2023. And I talked to people who had immigrated from all over the world, people from Somalia, people from Colombia, people from Iraq. And I was obviously, out with everybody else in the streets in 2020 and had been covering the movement for Black Lives for years. So I went to Memphis and talked to folks who were organizing around policing and traffic stops after the killing of Tyree Nichols. Speaking of state preemption, right? They worked really, really hard to win some restrictions on how police could handle traffic stops. And then the state government just swept right in and said, no, you can't. And it's, I can't say it's my most cheerful book. It is something that in which I'm trying to grapple with something more complicated than sort of simple hope. I've been joking that I'm going to write an article called Against Hope in this moment, but it is at the end of the day still a book about organizing, and it's a book about transformation, and it's a book about how grief is transformative, and we can use that if we acknowledge it and make space for it to have a different kind of revolutionary politics.
I really, really like that. And because I something I've been wrestling with is the extent to which grief, paralyzes folks. And, my whole theory of change, the whole reason we do this show and I do the activism and organizing I do is because I'm really convinced that mass collective action can make things better for us. We can win a better world that we deserve, but that does take a lot of participation. It takes a lot of engagement from everyday people, and people taking risk in some cases, people stepping up and doing things that are just, uncomfortable in some cases. And I can see where grief really is, something that paralyzes folks. So, could you talk just a little bit more about that in the way in which grief can, instead of paralyzing, actually maybe fuel us or propel us in a better direction?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in what you said right there that are really interesting, right? Because on the one hand, grief is absolutely a call to stop, right? It requires rest, it requires breaks, it requires acknowledgement. And a lot of the times as organizers, I really think a lot of something that Malkia Cyril said on one of the calls that they host a little while ago, and they're doing a ton of work around loss. I believe the website is radicalloss.com. So they're doing like really direct organizing around the questions of grief. But, they said, like, why do we think that as revolutionaries, our job is to work all the time? Why have we internalized the capitalist values that say that everything is about work? And so when I was thinking about this sort of halt that grief calls for, and also the need to change everything, I was really drawn to Walter Benjamin's metaphor of revolution as humanity reaching for the emergency brake, right? That what do we do as people in the labor movement when things are intolerable? We stop, right? A strike is a halting. It is a stopping. And so we can make those pauses an act of refusal as well as an act of rest, right? And I think the other thing is you mentioned risk. And I think that's so true. And right now we're really thinking about risk a lot because some of us are more at risk than others from this new Trump administration, right? They have trans people in their crosshairs. They have immigrants in their crosshairs. They have Black and brown folks and anybody in the federal workforce in their crosshairs. And so what do people like me who are none of those things? We have to step up and be more willing to take risk. And that's really true. And one of the things that I think was transformative for me about grieving was that if I had lost this much, it made the risks, it made the fear somehow less. The line that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. Well, when you had to imagine the end of a world in some way, and I'm very Jewish, my book is very Jewish in a lot of ways, and sort of Jewish tradition talks about every life, a whole world. When you've had to imagine that kind of end, it turns out it's kind of easier to imagine the end of capitalism. So I think that and especially in this moment, again, I've sort of joked about against hope, but like there's a lot of flailing right now in Trump 2.0. There's a lot of panic. And there isn't a lot of focus in flailing and panic. There's not a lot of strategic thinking in flailing and panic. Just we must do something is not always terribly helpful. We're not going to organize a general strike simply by Instagram post, posting through it can feel like we're doing something, but it's really not necessarily. And so to actually think strategically about where our power is and how we can leverage it, we do need to be able to think. We need to be able to pause. We need to be able to recover. We're talking about federal workers. I know you all know Chris Doles. I did a story on the federal worker organizing that just came out yesterday. And he was saying to me when we talked for that piece that, their aim is to create a crisis. Trump, Elon Musk, the rest of them, they think they can manage that crisis. And it's our job to make that crisis unmanageable. And one of the many ways we can make that crisis unmanageable is by refusing to participate in what they want us to participate in, which is, among other things, panic and flailing and running around like, the proverbial chicken with its head cut off. Actually, to find ways to remain calm and steady when everything around us seems, impossible is really important right now.
Sarah, I really, really appreciate your time. I appreciate all the great work you're doing. Jacob, did you have anything before you let her go?
No, I think that's all really great, and definitely familiar with Chris. He does a lot of good work. We both worked for the same federal agency for a very long time before I got a job in a different agency. So excited about that piece that you wrote on the federal worker stuff. Obviously, it hits. This is hitting me pretty directly. My program manager was part of the part of the ones who were let go by the Department of Energy. So, it's hearing that kind of affirmation from you and from Chris about the importance of kind of not allowing, not allowing ourselves to be disoriented, even though that's it's very hard not to feel discouraged and disoriented and like everything is kind of falling apart and feeling powerless. That's what they want. So, but I really appreciate the book. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate everybody tuning in. Had a lot of conversation in the chat specifically about the comments that we made about and the comments that we made about labor creates all wealth and the clip that we played and some, very confusing, frankly, conversation and things responding to things that were not said. And so, one of the things that I thought was pretty funny was that Mark in the chat said no one would simply bury large sums of money. There's a reason no one would bury large sums of money. That's because capital does not create wealth. Okay, it's because labor creates wealth. So you don't bury money to create money. You work to create money, or you enlist the work of others to create money. He said they can simply invest it in the S&P. Now that's a good point. That is what most people would do. And so I said, what is it that creates the profit for the companies that are within the S&P? And Mark responded that actually it's what creates profits? Maybe innovation. NVIDIA has one of the highest market caps in the world because those chip engineers designed advanced AI chips. And I said, oh, well, that's a very interesting part of the conversation there. What else do we call it, Adam, when engineers design things?
Could that be work?
Oh!
Could that be their job? Could that be their labor? Oh,
well, that's labor. That's labor, actually. So the reason that NVIDIA has one of the highest market caps in the world and has had a growing market cap is because of the labor of NVIDIA's workers. That's true, Mark. That's very good. You're learning. I'm glad we're on a journey together. We're on a journey together, and I'm enjoying it. And this is a very common kind of misunderstanding about what work is, because Mark later in the chat said, you all think that everybody works on an assembly line. And that would be a very strange thing for us to believe, because nobody within the Valley Labor Report actually works on an assembly line. So it would be strange if all of us, who none of us work on an assembly line, thought that everybody worked on an assembly line. That would be a strange thing for us to think. We don't think that, but what some people think is that only assembly line work is labor, and that is just not true. That is just not true. When engineers engineer things, when engineers design things, that is work, that is labor, and that is what creates wealth. Engineers' labor, letter carriers' labor, project managers' labor, even administrators, their administration is labor. Even business owners labor sometimes, right? Sometimes they labor, but the difference between labor as a class and business owners as a class is that labor gets its income, laborers get our income from the labor that we do, right? Whereas business owners as a class, in addition to, of course, a lot of them make wages, but they make their primary living off of the profits from the company, which is kind of the conglomeration of the wealth that is created from the labor of all of the workers, right? And so that's kind of the difference there. That is the difference between capital and labor, is that capital gets its money from the labor of others. Labor gets our money from the work that we do, right? And then here's another question. How many people on the planet can design those chips? It's supply and demand. That's how one's salary is determined. Saying labor creates no wealth is not a contradiction of the fact in and of itself that some labor is more valuable in the marketplace than others. Like, of course, obviously, some labor is going to be in higher demand and in less supply, and so can bring in a higher dollar or generate more wealth. That's not it. Saying labor creates all wealth is no comment on the debate about how much people should make, right? And I think that actually, interestingly, sports is like an interesting kind of part of this conversation, because a lot of people in sports, professional sports, or, you know, some people in professional sports make a lot of money, but they are not capitalists. They are as a part of the working class, because the labor that they create is, or the labor that the wealth that they get is generated by the labor that they do, right? And so, like, saying labor creates all wealth is not a statement about how much people should make, or the market, or anything like that. It's just saying the capital does not generate wealth, which is true. We're going to take a break really quick, and we're going to be right back to talk to Robin Hayden, Executive Director of Alabama Arise, about how these cuts to federal spending is going to affect working people in Alabama. Really excited to have this conversation with Robin. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back.
The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by LaborNotes. LaborNotes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about LaborNotes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in the South. This is the Valley Labor Report, broadcasting on 6 radio stations in 4 states: Alabama, Louisiana, Kentucky, and most recently, Tennessee. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. If you have anything to add, you can give us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Really looking forward to the second half of the program, where we will be talking to Natascha Uhlmann, staff writer at LaborNotes, about immigration and about how and why American workers can and should fight for their immigrant neighbors. We'll also be taking calls from federal workers about how the Trump administration is affecting them and the public writ large. We also have a clip from Bill Burr's podcast about billionaires. Really excited to play that clip. It's a pretty spicy one, so we have edited it. We have censored Bill Burr for the radio because it's a pretty spicy clip. Really excited for the second half of the program. 844-899-TVLR. 844-899-8857 is the phone number. You can leave us a voicemail at any time, and we will take calls from federal workers at noon. Really appreciate everybody hanging out with us in the chat. We have about 80 people watching us on YouTube now, but only 50 of them have liked the stream. So go ahead and like the stream if you haven't yet. Subscribe to the channel and all of that kind of stuff. Appreciate everybody hanging out. Also, obviously, watching us on Facebook, as always, is Mel and Joe. Really appreciate that. And are you, if folks are listening to us on the radio, I would appreciate you leaving us a comment at tvlr.fm/contact about how the radio transmission is doing. I've gotten a text message from a radio listener saying that we're coming in spotty, as if we have a bad phone connection. So tvlr.fm/contact if you're listening to us on the radio, and let us know how that's doing. I will compile those responses and send them to the station, perhaps asking for credit for this week as well. As last week. We've been having a lot of problems with WVNN, which is super crazy because I'm always told that the private sector is so freaking what's the word? Efficient and effective. And yet, for like 2 weeks in a row, we're having problems with our privately operated radio provider or radio affiliate. Only one of them, though. Only one of them that I know of is having these problems. But it's crazy because they're not the government. So I'm like totally flummoxed by what's happening here. I don't understand it. Robin Hayden is the executive director of Alabama Arise. We're going to be talking to her about how the cuts to the federal government are going to be affecting folks here in Alabama. Robin, welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Jacob. It's good to see you. I hate that this is the discussion we're having today.
Yes. It's a very difficult, very difficult conversation that we're having, and that folks all across the country are having. Like I said, we're on the radio in 4 states now, and this is going to be happening, or these kinds of things are going to be happening in all of the states where we're broadcasting, and all of the states across the country, because the federal government is such an important institution and has such a large effect on the lives of working people across the country. What would be like the top line thing that you would want to try to emphasize, to try to bring it home to people about what effects this government is going to have on the lives of Alabamians?
Everyone listening, every voter in the country really needs to know that the House Republican budget that was presented this week basically is a billionaire's first budget. We're talking about massive tax cuts and continuing ongoing tax cuts for billionaires and for corporations. The profits that these corporations and billionaires are making are on the backs of working people. In order to finance these tax cuts, our government is discussing massive cuts, $2.5 trillion in cuts. And these are going to hit southern states particularly hard. So these are going to hit red states who put this government in power the hardest. Alabama, for example, is the 7th largest beneficiary of federal funding in the entire country. Our surrounding states are very similar: Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia. It's the same story. So we're seeing threatened cuts to Medicaid of $900 billion. Not only would these cuts put our state economies into a free fall and cause a recession, half of all kids in our states are at risk of losing Medicaid health insurance coverage. SNAP is at huge risk of cuts. We're talking about $2.3 billion in threatened cuts to SNAP, which, provides food assistance for over 600,000 families in Alabama. So these are real threats. And that doesn't even begin to get into cuts to, research, university programs, legal services, housing assistance. For Alabama Rise in particular and our partners, we are focused mostly on those cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. And I would call on anyone who has ever benefited from Medicaid or SNAP to be calling your members of Congress this week. It's an emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you say to the idea that, the reason that the SNAP and Medicaid stuff is in the crosshairs is because of a real antipathy for poor people kind of generally. But if we kind of pretend like we don't know what's going on and just take them at face value and say that, the cutting back of these services is to incentivize people to get into the workforce, and the thing that, and presumably meaning the thing that they think keeps people out of the workforce is the SNAP benefits or the Medicaid benefits. What kind of what is the truth value of those sorts of arguments? And what do you think would actually be the result of big, large-scale SNAP and Medicaid benefits on the order that is being discussed right now in D.C.?
It's just not true that these programs prevent work. We find the opposite. So the reasons that people are dropping out of the workforce are because they cannot afford childcare. They don't get paid enough. They don't have adequate health care and are having premature disability and chronic disabling conditions. States that have a robust social safety net actually find increased labor force participation. So if you look at the lower rates of labor force participation in red states and southern states, behind that data, what you're finding is there's not a lot of people who are staying home because they're getting benefits. We have the leanest Medicaid program almost in the entire country in Alabama. It's just a myth that, you can drop out of the labor force and have a huge amount of support available to you. What we instead find is that these programs are a hand up. They're a help for people who are not getting benefits and wages in the workforce that they should be getting. They're a safety net for the largest percentage of people in our country who are poor, which are children. This breaks my heart as someone who had a baby last year. The families most likely to experience homelessness right now are those with children under the age of 1. So when we're talking about cutting SNAP benefits, cutting Medicaid health insurance, we're hitting those families. We're hitting families and people with serious disabilities. We're hitting families with parents and grandparents in nursing homes. We're hitting, single parent households that are struggling just to make ends meet. We're talking about cuts to potential like school lunch programs, which are hugely popular. The other thing I want to mention is there are more people working in this country now than there historically have ever been. So this myth that people aren't working or don't want to work is simply not true. What is true and what the data show is that people are not making enough in the workplace to live. And that's a deeper issue with our economy. What we know is not going to help is giving more money to billionaires because those billionaires are not sharing the wealth that is being created. They're extracting it from our communities.
Right. And I just want to underscore a couple of the things that you said. You know, a lot of a lot of this kind of stuff, it's always existed. There's always been attacks on programs that supports poor people. But one of the recent kind of pop culture things to tack on to reasons to attack programs for poor people is the idea that nobody wants to work anymore. We've heard this since the pandemic, where for like 6 months or something, there were some people that got or enhanced unemployment benefits, and so we have been left with this talking point since then that nobody wants to work because they're just getting so much money from the government. You point out correctly that Alabama has actually one of the lowest labor force participation rates in the country, meaning of the people that are legally eligible to be working, we have one of the lowest proportions of that potential labor force actually on the job. And yet, at the same time, Alabama also has one of the most restrictive welfare states in the country. And so if it were the case that more welfare or more programs to support poor folks actually incentivizes people to get into the workforce, the hypothesis that one would come up with would be that Alabama would have the highest labor force participation rate since we give the least amount of money for poor people. And yet that is quite simply not the case. You can look at any numbers that you want to, and you will find that that is not the case. Additionally, generally speaking, on a national level, the idea that nobody wants to work anymore is exactly like you said, confronted by the fact that more people within their prime working age, 25 to 54, are working than at any time in the history of this country, save for approximately 3 years in the 1990s. Okay? So the idea that there's just this raft of people that are sitting at home getting government services for free for not working is just not true. And I'm sure that you talk to legislators about this and that you have relayed this information to them. How do they respond? I mean, do they just think that you're lying, that it's not true, or that we have to take even more from the ball? Like, how do politicians and public figures react to that kind of information?
I think the right-wing messaging machine has been really effective at selling this lie that working and poor people are getting away with something, are, benefiting at your expense. If you're struggling, it's not your boss's fault. It's not wealthy people's fault. It's not the government's fault. It's the person doing slightly worse than you who's getting a little bit of help, right? So when we talk to lawmakers, there is this real misunderstanding about what programs and services are available for poor people. A lot of people mistakenly think that Medicaid is a cash benefit. They don't understand it's a health insurance program. You never get cash for being on Medicaid. Now, granted, I think if you're poor, probably the number one thing you need is cash, right? But they've managed to make cash be the bad guy, that how dare we help people who are suffering with more money. So Medicaid is not a cash assistance benefit. That's one major misconception. The second misconception is how many people actually qualify. There's this major misconception in a lot of southern states in particular that Medicaid is widely available for working age adults, and this is not true. So in Alabama, in order, let's say I was a single parent with 2 kids, if I made more than $350 a month, but let's say I made less than about $3,500 a month, I'm probably not going to be able to find affordable health coverage, and I'm certainly not going to qualify for Medicaid. So this misconception exists that all of these people who would benefit from expanding these programs, are not working or are just staying at home. Actually, pretty much in order to qualify for Medicaid in Alabama as a non-disabled or non-pregnant adult, you have to be virtually, destitute. You're not going to be working any kind of regular job and qualifying for these programs. So we talked to a lot of lawmakers who have this like mythical vision of who they think is dragging down the economy that they tell us. It's always their deadbeat son-in-law who stays on the couch all the time and plays video games. He's always like 22. Okay, now granted, I think we've all known or been the 22-year-old who stays on the couch too much and plays too many video games. But if you look at who is most benefiting from federal programs, it's not your single 22-year-old son-in-law, right? It's the single working mom. It's the teenage parent. It's someone struggling to go to community college at night while they're working a fast food job that doesn't pay very much. And again, when we hear, the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, from congressional Republicans, they frame it as though this is a very beneficial thing to do. We just have to force people to get to work. We know that they're doing this because it benefits employers to have cheaper labor. It benefits employers to have workers with less options. If we really want to create the kind of entrepreneurial economy with shared prosperity, where people are able to go start a business, or able to go back to college, or able to start a family and maybe take a few years out of the workforce, we're not incentivizing that with policies to cut benefits. I'm sorry, my child is crying.
No problem at all. And if you need to go, then feel free. But I just want to underscore again was one of the things that you said there, which is that a lot of these businesses they don't want competition for workers. They don't want high-paying jobs, and they want to be able to exploit people as much as they can. And specifically, I know of one project that was coming to Muscle Shoals potentially, and who knows, it may be gone now. I'm not sure if it's going to end up coming, but it was there was going to be a huge manufacturing facility built in Muscle Shoals to manufacture parts for EV batteries. It was supported by a grant from the Department of Energy, and this company agreed to project labor agreements. They agreed to high wages for operations staff. They agreed to neutrality in a union election. And people that I know in Muscle Shoals, in that area, have said that the businesses that make up, like the Economic Development Authority over there, want to kill this project because they are like small business tyrants who pay their employees like $12, $13 an hour, and they don't want to have to compete with actually good paying union jobs. So everything that they can do to sabotage that kind of genuine economic development in their community, they want to try to do so that they don't have to compete for the labor. And it's just very, very frustrating seeing stuff like that. So Robin Hyden,
and then can I just add one more quick thing, Jacob?
Yeah.
Our state has built an economic development strategy around recruiting manufacturing here to benefit from cheap labor. But I think we're finding the end of the effectiveness of that strategy when we can't even maintain our own state infrastructure, roads and bridges, rural hospitals, and schools. And we're going to find increasingly that we can't compete, in recruiting employers when we're not investing in our workers and our workforce. So again, I would just say, if you do one thing this week, if you take one action this week, please speak up about the proposed cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. We have an action alert on our website, alarise.org. There are partners in multiple states across the country working on this issue. It's so important that we not let them get away with pitting working people against each other in order to give more wealth to already wealthy people.
Right. Robin Hyden, Executive Director for Alabama Arise. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
Boss Watch is a segment that we do every week where we take a look at what bosses were up to in the southern United States. And we have been doing this by taking a look at press releases from federal agencies that enforce laws that protect working people. Agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the Department of Labor, the Environmental Protection Agency, etc., etc. But as we have been noting for the last few weeks, since the Trump administration took office, those enforcement actions have come to a complete standstill. So presumably, that means that all the bosses are on their best behavior. Somehow, immediately after Trump came in, after we had seen years of multiple stories, sometimes dozens of stories just in the southern United States of bosses stealing from workers, of bosses killing workers, of bosses polluting the environment, of bosses exploiting children. All of this stuff has magically ended and none of it's happening anymore. Obviously, that's foolish. If you believe that, your brain is very smooth and you should seek medical attention for your problems. So we are having to kind of rework how we construct Boss Watch, how we try to survey, how we try to kind of get a general survey of what bosses are doing to workers across the southern United States. And so we've been having to rely more on reporting, which is obviously difficult because reporters do not have a legal right to access workplace facilities like an OSHA inspector does. But some reporters are doing the Lord's work, like McKenna Schuler for the Orlando Weekly. She is reporting on a story where a restaurant worker at the University City Walk's Cowfish Sushi Burger Bar in Orlando. That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. That's the name of a restaurant right there. A restaurant worker there in Orlando, Florida, filed a lawsuit against Universal, accusing the billion-dollar entertainment complex of stealing her lawfully earned wages. I'm reading this directly from her reporting in the Orlando Weekly. I'm leaving like 70% of the article out, so you're going to want to check it out and read the whole thing because there's some good stuff there that I want you to check out. But Tanya Roberts, 57, was a food runner of about 1 year, and she specifically contends in her lawsuit that Universal improperly utilized Florida's tip credit, ultimately paying her less than what she was lawfully owed for her work. Florida's current minimum wage for non-tipped workers is $13 an hour, while workers who earn tips must be paid a minimum wage of at least $9.98 an hour. For tipped workers, that can include a tipped credit of up to $3.02 an hour, meaning an employer can count up to $3.02 of the hourly minimum in earned tips. Essentially, the tip credit allows employers to pay workers a lower base wage with the expectation that earned tips will make up the difference. Roberts' lawsuit, however, accuses Universal, one of the largest employers in Central Florida, of improperly using the tip credit by too often assigning her side work that was not tip producing, for instance, getting plates and silverware together and preparing sauces. According to the lawsuit, Roberts was asked to perform excessive amounts of such side work every shift, often for hours at a time, before and after and during Roberts' tip-producing activities. The complaint states that altogether this non-tip-producing side work made up more than 20% of her total work each week, in violation of the U.S. Department of Labor's interpretation of how to properly utilize the tip credits system. The lawsuit also argues Universal Orlando improperly used a tipping pool system by distributing tips to tipped workers as well as non-tipped employees who have a higher minimum wage floor. Roberts herself told Orlando Weekly in a phone call that she only realized she was being underpaid after she reached out to a lawyer after facing what she described as retaliation for speaking up about unsanitary kitchen equipment. Back in September, she said she complained to management about dirty bottles containing sauces for customers' food. She was told to take photos of the bottles, sometimes containing traces of multiple sauces, and yet the problem did not get better. I was told to put new labels on expired sauces, she alleged in a text. Universal's theme parks division, extending beyond its park in Orlando, reported $8.6 billion in revenue in 2024, down 3.7% from 2023, according to Theme Park Insider. The entertainment complex, owned by parent company Comcast, is also getting ready to open up its highly anticipated Epic Universe theme park at Universal Orlando Resort in May. You can read her full report with more information and context with the article titled "Restaurant Worker at Universal Orlando City Walk Files Lawsuit Over Wage Theft." Of course, for the last few weeks, we have been partnering with Labor Lab. Labor Lab is a employer watchdog organization. They are committed to safeguarding the right to organize through unions, collective bargaining, and mutual aid. They do this by combing through reports that union busters are required to file with the Department of Labor. This segment of Boss Watch is Union Busters. These are the new reports filed with the Department of Labor last week. Gen 4/Gilbert Power/Schuylkill Energy in Pennsylvania hired East Coast Labor Relations, doing business as Reliant Labor Consultants, to union bust at multiple locations for $3,800 a day. This is interesting about the company. East Coast Labor Relations provides union avoidance services to employers. They advertise that their consultants are former high-ranking union officials and that they are bilingual. The language on Reliant Labor Consulting's website is identical. Their services include avoiding, preventing, and fighting a union. Additionally, they run Mayberry Productions that specializes in producing video content for union avoidance campaigns. Joseph Brock, president of the union busting firm, was the president of Teamsters Local 830 in Philadelphia. Brock lost a contentious election for local president in 2007 and was ousted from the local Teamsters office. According to Brock, he left the Teamsters because, quote, he became disillusioned with what happens behind the scenes with unions, particularly when contracts are being negotiated, unquote. Definitely not because he lost an election. Brock is still receiving his pension from the Teamsters even while he makes $1 million a year fighting unions. Brock identifies as an unabashed liberal union buster. That said, he helped defeat a union campaign at the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas in 2014. Just scum of the earth. I have also sent Joseph Brock an email inviting him to debate on the show. So maybe we'll see Joseph Brock debating us about unions in the future and why he still takes a Teamsters pension while he's making money fighting unions, including the pensions. What a scummy. I can't say it on the radio, but holy crap.
Right.
Imperial Dade in Massachusetts hired Quest Consulting and Labor. Imperial Dade in Massachusetts hired Quest Consulting and Labor Management Associates for $225 an hour. The election was closed due to a regional director order, so the union busters won there. Jessica Thomas is the president of Quest Consulting in 2023. In 2023, Quest Consulting reported making $2.7 million from employers and dispersing $2.1 million to subcontractors. Quest Consulting is incorporated in Nevada. Labor Management Associates is a prolific and experienced union-busting firm run by Daniel Block, who has, at several points in his career, been associated with other prominent union-busting firms in the United States. Labor Management Associates often file legally mandated paperwork to the Department of Labor late, if at all. It appears also that the business license for LMA may be expired. Super great. Northwestern Medical Center in Vermont hired Heightened Solutions. They were subcontracted by the Vindex Group, who has not yet filed an LM20 for this work. The Vindex Group is based in Austin, Texas. According to the Texas Comptroller, the Vindex Group has an involuntarily ended status due to a tax or administrative forfeiture. Super, just totally great business people here. And finally, Amazon DCY1 in Connecticut hired Edward Hinkle, who was subcontracted by Road Warrior Productions, who have not yet filed an LM20 for this work. That wraps it up for our show this week. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. We really appreciate it. Adam, do you have any plugs for us?
Yeah, go to labornotes.org/events, and you can check out the workshops they have coming up. They have Steward's Workshop, Assertive Grievance Handling on February 24th. That's at 6:30 p.m. Central. Highly recommend that if you are a steward or an elected officer, anyone who's having to work with grievances, definitely recommend you check that out. Again, that's February 24th at 6:30, Assertive Grievance Handling. And on March 11th at 6:30 p.m. Central, Labor Notes has their usual workshop, What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart. Hopefully you don't need that class, but if you do need that class, it's a really good one to attend. We've got a lot of stuff going on locally. I just want to remind folks, Robin mentioned it earlier, but you can go to alarise.org, get plugged in there if you want to follow the state legislature. And the North Alabama Area Labor Council has our meeting Monday night, so looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah. I got to prepare for that. All right, folks. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Looking forward to talking to y'all next week. You've been listening to the Valley Labor Report. TVLR.fm is our website. Make sure you find us online, Facebook, and YouTube to continue listening to the program. We've got a great second half of the program lined up for you, and we'll be taking calls from federal workers at noon at 844-899-TVLR, but you can leave us a voicemail at any time throughout the week. If you don't find us online or continue listening to the program, we'll see you next week. All right, folks, we're off of the radio now. Appreciate y'all staying with us. Like I said, got a great second half of the program lined up for you. We're going to take a break really quick, and we will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
This is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country and the world. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you'd like to call in and leave us a voicemail, the number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We'll be taking calls with a preference for federal workers calling in here in about an hour at about noon o'clock Central. So hope you're getting your dialing fingers ready, federal workers. I know we have a few of you in the chat, at least, or in the audience. Bill Burr is a comedian that has for a long time kind of been associated with the kind of like manosphere sort of thing, you know, like he goes on Joe Rogan and stuff like that. But notably, unlike a lot of these other kind of manosphere types, he has not gone along with the kind of right-wing turn and culture war kind of stuff. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later, but you know that so many people just get so like in their head about this culture war stuff. And it's so, and it just totally poisons their brain, and it causes them to just totally flip on like everything that they've ever believed, because they like get uncomfortable around trans people. And even like one of the most, I think the most sympathetic, like normal person concern about trans folks is about trans folks in sports. Right? I think that's one of the most sympathetic kind of things that you can imagine about just the general conversation about trans people. There were more people laid off last week just within the National Nuclear Security Administration than every single trans athlete in the NCAA combined. Okay? There were 325 people laid off at the National Nuclear Security Administration within the Department of Energy. There are 10 trans athletes in the NCAA, and not even all of those are trans women, which is the only one that people actually care about. Like, nobody cares about a trans man, right, competing in men's sports. That's just not a concern. Nobody cares about that. It's only trans women. And so who even knows how many of those 10 are trans women, right? And so the idea that you would, like, orient your entire political worldview around this social conservatism is so befuddling to me because, because it just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, this is to the extent that I even grant that it's a problem, we're talking about 10 people out of thousands, tens of thousands. How many NCAA athletes are there? There's a lot, right? 325 people just at the National Nuclear Security Administration. There are thousands of other federal workers across the country. People, and like, frankly, it's a bigger deal. Somebody losing their job just without any other ramifications. It's a bigger deal when somebody loses their job than it is that a trans person competes in a basketball game, right? Like, that's just a bigger deal, okay? At least to me. And so, and I have always believed that, even as a social conservative. I am not socially conservative anymore. I used to be. Even as I was, I didn't know anything about politics like as recently as 2014, and I started trying to learn about politics, and I was almost immediately convinced of the economic arguments for kind of the left, and it took me a lot longer to like lose my social conservatism. So I voted for Bernie Sanders even as I believed that abortion and gay marriage should be illegal. Why? Because even when I thought the government should stop gay people from getting married, it was more important to me that people get health care than my queasiness with homosexuals. Okay? I no longer care about gay marriage. Obviously, I think gay marriage should be legal now, and it's, that's kind of like, it doesn't make sense to me anymore why somebody would be against gay marriage. But like, look, I used to be there.
But even then, like, I did not care about it as much as people having healthcare, as people having good wages, as people having jobs, right? And so it's just so ridiculous that so many people have lost their ever-loving mind over this cultural stuff. This cultural stuff. People living their lives in ways that make you uncomfortable. Bill Burr has not gone down that rabbit hole, and he continues to be incredibly based. And here's this clip where he talks about billionaires, on his podcast from last week.
The amount of people that are struggling out there because of these fucking billionaires, and they got us all arguing liberal and conservative. We got to stop doing that. Like, I am so tired of hearing about people going to bed worried about what's going to happen next week. There is so much fucking money in this country, and there's so much work being done, you know. And if you work a full fucking week at a job, you should be able to pay your fucking rent. You shouldn't have to go out and get another fucking job and still be struggling. It's bad for the country, because then the kids don't see their parents and they're not getting the upbringing that they need. It's so fucking, these fucking billionaires, they need to be put down. You know, like fucking rabid dogs. They're like rabid with fucking greed and just going out and just dividing everybody. You know, just the fucking epitome of this time right now. Like how divisive we are, that, like, you know, the Gulf of Mexico is now called the Gulf of America, and people get excited. Like, how the does that help your wallet? It's an empty gesture, and then it's also like a racist gesture. Like, that's the white guy that's him saying "f*** Mexicans" without saying it. You know, like, who has a fucking problem with Mexicans? Like, what is the real problem? This is just such an ugly fucking time. Yeah, that just sucks. That sucks.
I mean, wow, that is exactly on point from Bill Burr. And Brendan in the chat says there are more billionaires in this cabinet than there are trans athletes in the whole country. I mean, that's crazy. Like, how do you care more about trans athletes than the fact that at the inauguration of there has never been a higher concentration of wealth probably in the history of the world than there was at the inauguration of Donald Trump, and you care more about trans athletes? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. You have lost your mind. You have lost your mind. And yes, billionaires should not exist. Absolutely. Bill Burr is a little bit more extreme. I think we should just take their wealth from them. I think that we should just, every dollar over $999 million should be confiscated at a 100% tax rate. I'm a moderate. I'm a moderate because it's not good for society. I mean, just, you know, we can talk about, oh, does Elon Musk, does he deserve to have $400 billion? Maybe, maybe not. I think no. I think it's ridiculous to believe that Elon Musk deserves or he earned $400 billion. The people at his company earned $400 billion and he just has it. But even if you believe that he deserves $400 billion, it's not good for society that one man can have so much power without a democratic consensus to give him that power, right? I mean, he just, you know, like it or not, like the results of the election or not, Elon Musk basically just bought this presidency himself with, while his net worth increased, right? That is insane. Nobody should have that level of power based on their economic status. It's not good for... I mean, look at Bill Gates. What Bill Gates did to education in this country with all of his, accountability for teachers and standardized testing and all this kind of stuff. Just totally set education in this country back for a generation. But why? because he was a billionaire and he had money to throw around and he had an idea. He thought he was better than all the teachers in the country. And so he decided that he was going to change the course of education in this country for a generation just because he could, not because he had exhibited any sort of expertise or prowess in this field, just because he had the money to do it. And he did it, and then he commissioned a study to observe the results of his experiments in education. And guess what? The study that he commissioned said, oh, wow, Bill, you've really screwed it up. You've really done a bad thing here. You've screwed up education. You have negatively impacted thousands of students, thousands of teachers, thousands of communities. And why did he, just because he has $1 billion, it's not good for society that Bill Gates has that much freaking money. It is not good for society that Elon Musk has that much freaking money. And so there was a comment saying your partner made a ridiculous statement a couple of weeks ago saying that nobody should be able to acquire more than $1 trillion. I think you meant $1 billion. And yes, I don't know who said that a couple of weeks ago, but I agree with that. Both of us agree with that, Adam and myself. And then you say, if that was the case, there would be no NVIDIA. That is just so stupid. That is so stupid. Who is the CEO of NVIDIA? Is that like a Microsoft thing? Is that a Microsoft thing? Jensen Huang. Jensen Huang. What is Jensen Huang's? Wow, he was born in 1993. Jensen Huang's net worth. His net worth is $118 billion. Do you think that he would not have created NVIDIA if he could only have $999 million? Like, people are not only motivated by money. It's ridiculous. It's so stupid. It is so stupid. People are motivated by all sorts of things, by caring about something, which is why, labor lawyers working for the NLRB, every single one of them could leave the NLRB and make double or triple what they're making right now working for a management side labor law firm. But they don't, because they care, right? Because they care, and so they work at the NLRB. I think that's a more noble kind of thing. That you care about the NLRB, you care about workers, and so you're going to work at the NLRB instead of working for the boss. I think that's noble, and the idea that you're never going to get innovation if you don't allow people to collect $1 billion in wealth is stupid. It's stupid. You should be embarrassed for thinking that. It's so stupid. We got an interview with Natascha Uhlmann that we're going to play really quick, though. Adam, I don't know if you had anything else to say about the billionaire stuff.
Actually, I think I'll pass. Since we are recorded, and yeah, I think that's best for me to keep my thoughts to myself. I appreciate the segment. Appreciate the chat. Interesting characters in the chat, and I know, there are some folks who are bootlickers, for lack of a better term, and it's unfortunate because chances are, if you're listening to our show, you're probably not ever going to be a billionaire. And last I checked, folks didn't get $1 billion by looking out for everyday people. So.
Yep. And here's another, Mark also says in the chat, this guy wants to propel the U.S. into a depression we would never come out of. Here's a homework assignment for you, Mark. I want you to go and look up the period of the highest growth in the GDP. And then once you figure that period out, I want you to compare that to the periods where there was the most and least economic equality. Okay? So we've got two things we want to figure out in this homework assignment. What was the highest period of growth in the GDP? And what were the periods of highest and lowest wealth inequality? Okay? Maybe let's do that homework assignment. And for everybody that's not Mark, hold your ears so you don't hear this because I don't want to spoil it for you. But the answer is the GDP, the value of everything produced in this country, grew by the largest percentage from like the 40s to the 60s. Okay? During the New Deal era. The New Deal era also saw the least wealth inequality in the history of the country. We had the least amount of inequality during that era. We had fewer people than ever making extraordinary amounts of money, and we had more people than ever making a reasonable amount of money. Okay? So do with that what you will. Here's the interview that we recorded last week with Natascha Uhlmann.
We have on the show today Natascha Uhlmann, staff writer at LaborNotes, formerly at In These Times, a writer and organizer. She has also written for The Guardian, Truth Out, Rewire News, and Teen Vogue. Natascha, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I wanted to get you on because you have been writing a lot recently about the, the immigrant justice movement and the labor movement, some interplay that can and should be happening there, and just generally the effect that the new administration is having on immigrants. So I guess, can we start there? What is happening right now within the immigrant community because of the Trump administration? Like, what's going on vis-a-vis like immigration enforcement? What is it doing to these communities and members of the community that are both immigrant and non-immigrant?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's no denying it's a scary moment. ICE appears to be ramping up enforcement sweeps. We're not perfectly sure since they're not disclosing numbers consistently, but what we are seeing are really public enforcement actions at work sites that put communities on edge, actions like transferring immigrants to Guantanamo Bay in total secrecy and with no accountability. And these sorts of actions are already having a really chilling effect. I've heard reports of people not picking up essential medications like insulin at the pharmacy or afraid to go to work because if they're picked up in a raid, who will pick up their kids from school? We're also seeing a lot of bad actors who are seizing on this moment to spread terror. I heard from one organizer that a photo circulating of an ICE van was actually photoshopped, so someone just took an ICE van and photoshopped it into a local grocery store parking lot to terrify people. And I've also personally seen someone screen cap a photo from an ICE raid that was 4 or 5 years ago and try to frame it as if it was this week. So we're absolutely seeing an escalation, but I think given this climate of fear, one thing I just want to foreground is that it's so vital we don't do ICE's work for them. You know, ICE wants to project far more strength than it has and hopes people will remove themselves from public life or self-deport. So a lot of organizers I'm talking to right now are saying spread power, not panic. You know, it can be really tempting if you see a social media post of an ICE raid to want to spread the word. But to whatever degree you can slow down, verify the information, see where you can plug in, it's really likely that there's already deportation defense networks in your area.
Right. How do you kind of hold those two things at the same time, like wanting to spread news about potential raids to try to protect people that you know, while also being cognizant of the fact that sometimes there's malicious and non-malicious misinformation going out there about this kind of stuff? What you mentioned, maybe take a beat and don't share that social media post right away. What other things should I be doing?
Yeah, I think tapping into the organizing that is already happening and long preceded the Trump administration is really important because there are folks who, have been in this fight and are building these sorts of networks, things like rapid response networks where if there's a deportation or even an ICE check-in, you can mobilize the community. I think seeing where the organizing already is because it's so likely that that's already happening in your community.
How should what can people do in the event that they are that they see an ICE raid or they are the target of an ICE raid? What are some kind of tips and best practices for interacting with ICE? We've seen coverage of Chicago and like Tom Homan really being upset that folks in Chicago know their rights. What are the kinds of things that folks across the country are doing to kind of protect themselves and their community?
Yeah, so if you're out, it's helpful if you can record, but before posting, verify with organizers, say this is what I saw, here's the date, capture as much information as you can. But also, there are these existing networks of rapid response, often in a Signal group or WhatsApp, that you can get plugged into, and folks can share information in a way that is, responsible and safe. Gotcha. Also, I should say, Arise Chicago has put together a really useful Know Your Rights in the context of, for workers in particular, worksite enforcement, and also like contingency plans. What should I do if I need to make plans for my kids, if I'm caught up in a raid, of things in that vein. So I would suggest checking out that resource as well.
Why should non-immigrant workers be concerned about this sort of, indiscriminate kind of mass deportation stuff potentially happening in their communities? Like, why should, a native U.S.-born worker care about what ICE does or doesn't do?
Yeah, I think that whether you're a citizen or not, however you feel about immigration, as working people, we all have stakes in this fight. There's a common notion that immigrants drive down wages, but I think that argument misses something that's really important, and that's that the boss can only pay this worker less because of their immigration status, because that vulnerability that hangs over these workers' heads and forces them to settle for less. And that's bad for all of us. This sort of division, really only serves the boss, because let's be real, it's not the immigrant worker saying, please, please pay me less. It's the boss choosing to take advantage of a person in a vulnerable position and hoping that you'll be too mad at the immigrant to get mad at him. So honestly, this divide and conquer stuff has been part of the boss's playbook for as long as there's been a boss's playbook.
Right. And there was a really good article. It's been from a few years ago, but there was a good article in Catalyst that kind of surveyed some of the literature around immigrants' effects on wages. And there's, like you said, there's kind of dispute about that. There are some people that say that it has no effect. I think that a lot of people have difficulty kind of buying that argument. But even the kind of nativist conservative, worst case scenario is a 2 to 5% reduction in wages in a similar kind of community or industry. And guess what? Unionization increases wages by 10 to 14%, and if you look in immediate communities and immediate industries, you can see as much as a 50% wage premium on unionization. So if you that kind of brings us to the answer that we have had on this program for as long as we've been doing the show, which is that we shouldn't be trying to advocate for the removal of these types of people from our community. We should be looking for increased integration into the community, up to and very much including specifically integration into the labor movement and giving them the power to organize for better wages and working conditions for themselves, their families, and their communities. And so how are you seeing unions across the country react to these attacks on undocumented workers that may or may not be members of their unions or the labor movement? But how are unions responding across the country?
Yeah, so there's a lot the labor movement can do in this moment to stand with our immigrant brothers and sisters. I mean, first, just to say, if you're not in a union, organizing your workplace is one of the most crucial things you can do in this moment, because a strong fighting labor movement is one of the most powerful tools to win social justice, whether immigrant justice, justice for our trans brothers and sisters, and beyond. So if you don't know where to start, I suggest reaching out to EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. They can hook you up with an organizer who can talk you through the process. But more broadly, there's quite a bit that the labor movement can do. First, of course, there's Know Your Rights trainings. The Painters Union has been really active around this. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, like immigrant workers can't join unions or you don't have to pay them overtime. And that stuff hurts all of us because it sinks down standards lower, pits us against each other in a race to the bottom, and, lets the boss immediately cudgel you with that, right? If I'm paying this person less, why should I pay you more? So correcting misinformation and, knowing what to do in the event of an enforcement action is really essential in this moment. And again, Arise Chicago has an immigrant worker toolkit that's full of great information. But there's also things like rapid response deportation defense. Escucha Mi Voz is a faith-based labor organization in Iowa, and they make it a point to mobilize the community when someone is called into an ICE check-in. This person has a check-in Saturday morning, who can come out? And they found that if there's a large group of community supporters present, ICE will actually very rarely move forward with deportation proceedings as a safety issue for their agents. But in addition to that, they've committed to something that I think is really powerful and important. They have committed to having 6,000 one-on-one conversations within their communities. And something I think is really cool is that the way they talk about it actually sounds a lot like an organizing campaign, like face-to-face one-on-ones about immigration, engaging with people who don't agree with us in good faith, and over time, looking to bring them into the movement. There are also, sanctuary union resolutions. The National Union of Healthcare Workers made a sanctuary union pledge in 2017 and reaffirmed it a few days ago, in which they pledge to not voluntarily cooperate with federal agents or enforce immigration laws. And if that's something that you want to pursue for your own union, we've got some sample resolutions on our website at LaborNotes and at Workday Magazine, or folks can reach out to me anytime to talk about it. And finally, there is good contract language. So the Chicago Teachers Union has one language saying that you don't have to let ICE through the door unless they have a signed warrant, which they basically never do. So that said, a CTU teacher made a really important point as we were talking about it. She said, you can win all the best contract language in the world, but if you and everyone else don't know your contract, who's going to be the person to tell ICE, no, you can't come in, we don't have to let you? So making sure you and everyone you know are informed about what you won is also just as essential. But there's some other really good language out there. Some UE locals have won good language around employment verification audits, requiring that workers get several months' notice ahead of time. And if they can't produce the right documentation, they get 4 months within which to present that. And after that, you can get another 20 months for rehire with full seniority. So, there's a lot of important protections that can be won in a contract. And again, we all have stakes in this fight, because if the boss can treat a worker worse, even if it's in a way that doesn't apply to you as a citizen, he's still setting a precedent of lowering standards because he can get away with it. And that is really bad for all of us. So at LaborNotes and Workday, we put together the best contract language we could find around protecting immigrant members, and just like a guide that reiterates a lot of this information. So you can find it on both of our sites.
Workday Magazine is a really cool publication covering labor in the Midwest. Folks should definitely check it out. I can't remember the website, but if you Google Workday Magazine, it'll come up. And so those are some of the, some best practices and some of the things that, a few unions are doing that you think are good in response to this sort of attack on immigrants and our immigrant members and our immigrant communities. How would you characterize the response of the labor movement writ large to this increase in nativist and anti-immigrant rhetoric? I've seen some people feel disappointed with the response from the labor movement so far, but from where I am, it seems mostly like the labor movement is at least saying the right things and encouraging their affiliates to do the right things, I think with the marked exception of Teamsters president Sean O'Brien. But I don't know. It seems to me, other than that most of the rhetoric around it has been at least good. But how do you see it from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are really springing to action in this moment. I'm hearing from a lot of teachers who want to either, fight for a sanctuary union resolution to protect their students, or, high school teachers who are organizing around what do we do in the event of ICE at the door. So I think if anything, it has for many people been a very galvanizing moment. I do think, yeah, Sean O'Brien is the big unfortunate exception. And my colleague Luis Feliz Leon wrote a really fantastic piece in N+1 this week, just kind of examining those failures.
Right. Yeah, the piece is called Solidarity in Retreat. It's really good. And like you said, it's in N+1 magazine. And your piece that you wrote with Sarah Lazare is titled How Labor Can Fight Back Against Trump's Mass Deportation Agenda. So really appreciate your work on those. Is there anything else that you wanted to say on the immigration question before we kind of switch to trade?
I think that largely sums it up. Thanks.
So you also wrote a piece a while ago titled "What Could Workers Win in a New NAFTA?" This you wrote, I guess, like 3 weeks ago, which is pretty wild. But it was prompted by, I think in response in part to UAW President Shawn Fain's op-ed in the That's your warning. And
we believe in freedom over
we
here.
believe in freedom and freedom of speech in particular. We are not audio muted. Okay. So as you can see there, we were about to go into a conversation about trade with Natascha Uhlmann. So you'll want to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you see that full conversation when it comes out. Lots of good stuff in our conversation about trade there, but wanted to make sure that we had time to talk about the federal worker attacks from the Trump administration. I did want to note, though, that in the chat, Mark said, I'd love to see this woman arrested. And Mark, this is your warning that calling for arrests of our guest will get you banned from the program permanently. So that is your one warning. Anything else like that will get a permanent ban, not just a timeout. You will be permanently banned and blocked from the program. We believe in freedom on the Valley Labor Report, and particularly freedom of speech. And so when we're talking about informing people of their rights as it relates to ICE and things like that, we're not going to tolerate any sort of, frankly, fascist sort of stuff as far as, calling for the arrest of people, informing folks of their rights. So there you go. There's that. I think there was a pretty compelling argument made in that segment about how the attacks on immigrants are going to affect folks and why we should be concerned about our fellow workers. So Trump has continued his assault on working people, those who work for the government and those who are served by it. We're going to go through some of those discrete actions from the last week, but Musk spoke at some event, I think in India, where he laid out sort of the motivating drive behind this attack, and it really lays bare, the foolishness of this whole thing and the motivating ideology that goes along with this sort of stuff. We're going to go ahead and open the phone lines. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, 844-899-8857. We'll begin taking calls as soon as we wrap up with this. But here's this clip from Elon Musk in India.
Support and direction of President Trump. We are reducing the size of the bureaucracy, getting rid of excess regulatory regulations, and there's also so many agencies and regulatory authorities that they actually step on each other's feet. It's kind of like having a sports game where there are too many referees on the field, like more referees than players at times. Now that would be a silly game, if the players can't pass the ball without hitting a referee, But it's kind of getting to that point in the U.S. So there's roughly 450 federal agencies of one kind or another. That's more agencies. That's almost an average of 2 agencies per year since the formation of the United States. So, I mean, how many agencies do you really need to run a country? 99? Not 450, that's for sure. So.
And
so there's did he mentioned the things about referees in that, right? Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I did hear that. He ended it with that 425 agencies comment, and that is just such a silly thing to be preoccupied with. For one, there's no definition of what an agency is within the federal government. There are like 14 or 15 departments, actual cabinet level departments, but many lists of federal agencies include sub-departments as their own agencies, including the list of federal agencies on Wikipedia. Take the Department of Defense. Wikipedia lists the nearly 300 offices and commands and agencies within the department as separate agencies. Just the U.S. Army, which is only one branch of the U.S. military, has 43 sub-offices. And so which one do you want to cut or, bring into Excel to look at this U.S. Army commands? This is just a few of them. The United States Army Training and Doctrine Command, the United States Army Reserve Command, the U.S. Army Direct Reporting Unit, the Arlington National Cemetery, the U.S. Army Acquisition Support Center, the Civilian Human Resources Association, the United States Army Corps of Engineers. How would it contribute to the efficient execution of the mission for, say, the Corps of Engineers to do the work of the Army Training and Doctrine Command? And what would it even mean to get rid of some of these different agencies? It's just so ridiculous to be preoccupied with the number of, like there are not 425 tasks within that the federal government does that are discrete enough that there could be an efficiency gain from creating a sub-department or agency or office dedicated just to that discrete task? Like, you don't think there are 425 tasks that the federal government does that would create an efficiency gain for? I mean, that's insane. That's just crazy. I've been part of reorganizations before. I've been part of organizations where we merge branches or different departments. I've been part of reorganizations where we split organization or where we split programs and departments and offices and things like that. And like that, sometimes that's effective and sometimes it's not. But the idea that like Elon Musk heard the number 425 and thought to compare that number to the number of years that America has been around, rather than, I don't know, the number of employees that are administered or that are employed by the federal government, which is like 3 million, or maybe how many people there are in the U.S. that are served by the federal government, which is 334 million. It's just so stupid. And like when you hear, when you hear things like that, such shallow and kind of silly analysis of problems, diagnosis of problems, and prognosis for solutions, it should really kind of trigger your skepticism about the the depth with which this person engages in really anything. There was another comment that he made in there about referees, that there are so many regulations and so many regulators that that sometimes you got too many cooks in the kitchen. You just got people are just there's just so much folks going on that it's difficult for anybody to do anything. Okay, well, let's take a look at workplace safety. Right, that's a role that the government has a reasonable hand in, right? I think that most people agree that the government should have some role in enforcing workplace safety standards in workplaces. In fact, that is a big reason. That's one of the big reasons that people say we don't need unions anymore, is because the government does it. So we don't need unions. We got the government. Okay. Well, in Alabama,
in fiscal year 23, there were 24 federal workplace safety investigators. There were 0 investigators for workplace safety from the state. There are 2.28 million workers in the state of Alabama. It would take the 24 federal workplace safety investigators 160 years to visit each business one time. One time! 160 years! How can you say that there's too much regulation? I mean, we have Republicans literally introducing legislation to abolish the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which would presumably be supported by Elon Musk, almost certainly. How do you come to that conclusion? We have 24 federal workplace safety investigators in Alabama for 2 million workers, okay? And we have been tracking, we do the segment called Boss Watch. We take a look at, violations of the law by employers, particularly in the South. And one was this Decatur business that manufactures GE appliances. In June of this year, a worker died there because of employer negligence, according to the U.S. Department of Labor and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Literally 2 weeks after this company in Decatur, Alabama, was fined approximately $200,000 for being responsible for the death of a worker, somebody else had to go to the hospital because of a workplace accident. And unlike contemporary reporting from the time when the worker died in June or July of 2024, where OSHA investigators were immediately responding and immediately on the scene and immediately investigating, contemporary reporting of this has so far not mentioned OSHA at all. There has been no indication that OSHA is involved in investigating this new safety incident at this Decatur business, who, again, remember, literally only 2 weeks ago was fined $200,000 for being responsible for the death of one of its workers. We have too many cooks in the kitchen. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Okay? But that's like the ideology motivating this entire Doge thing. It's all motivated by shallow, simple, nonsensical reasoning and a misunderstanding of the way the world works, and also, being a billionaire and wanting to be able to move through the world in exactly the way that you want without having to care for, the lowly lives of working people, because you should not have to concern yourself with that. But that's the motivating ideology of the Doge thing. And More Perfect Union had a really good video about how Doge has not been transparent and how there are serious conflicts of interest with Elon Musk and what he is doing with Doge. Let's play this clip from More Perfect Union.
When Elon Musk was campaigning for Donald Trump, he made one key promise about Doge.
We're going to be very open and transparent and be very clear about this is what we're doing. Here are the issues.
But Doge has been shrouded in secrecy. Musk wouldn't even disclose who works for him. It took reporters, unions, and lawsuits to reveal which young, unqualified racists were digging through sensitive government information. And Musk's own financial disclosure form is concealed from the public.
Why does Elon's financial disclosure remain secret? Because nobody's looking at that.
So what is Musk hiding about his work at Doge? Here are 3 conflicts of interest that Musk doesn't want you to know about. Number 1, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
The agency was created by Congress after the 2008 financial crisis
and is designed to shield consumers from predatory banks and lenders.
In late January, Musk's X signed a deal with Visa to create a digital wallet. He wants people to do their banking on X, invest on X, and pay for things on X. The partnership would have been overseen by the CFPB, which in November finalized new rules to prevent digital wallet fraud. Now, well, good luck if you get scammed. Number 2, the FAA.
Tonight, the dramatic images, the midair explosion of SpaceX's massive Starship rocket.
I mean, the Federal Aviation Administration said they're going to investigate this. SpaceX won't be able to launch any more rockets until that investigation is complete.
To be clear, those clips were about 2 different major SpaceX disasters and just a taste of the trouble that Musk has had with the FAA over the past few years. In September, the agency fined SpaceX over $630,000 over a few other launch issues, and Elon called for the administrator to be fired. FAA admin Michael Whitaker stepped down on the eve of the inauguration. Planes keep crashing, but at least SpaceX doesn't have to worry about any oversight. Number 3, the Department of Labor.
Unreported injuries, excessive hours, abusive conditions, over 100 ambulance calls.
The log shows that employees were being electrically shocked when plugging in sump pumps into a portable generator.
Musk's companies have been prolific labor law violators and regularly face inquiries on safety, discrimination, and free speech.
I disagree with the idea of unions. I just don't like anything which creates kind of a lords and peasants sort of thing.
Tesla, SpaceX, and X all face NLRB charges for union busting. Now the world's richest man is in the middle of a lawsuit arguing that the NLRB is unconstitutional altogether, though Trump already fired enough members to shut that one down too, because, you know, they hate the
lords and peasants sort of thing.
So if we're to believe Donald Trump when he says,
"Trust Elon? Oh, he's not gaining anything."
Prove it to us. Stop hiding and make everything public.
So they spoke about conflicts of interest there, and that's all obvious. There are more, but I think the point is made, so I won't elaborate on that. But I do want to elaborate on the transparency thing, because Musk is clearly lying about how he's being so transparent. He's pointing to his Twitter activity, and his Twitter activity around the Doge thing is not transparency. It's just a lunatic lying and conveying half-truths. I want to give you 2 stories to illustrate that. First, $50 million for condoms in Gaza. Just straight up, didn't happen. Just did not happen. And he has not taken down that claim from Twitter or anything like that. He's admitted that it's, may not have been true. But there's when confronted with that, there was just no, interest in reflecting on why he believed that. Where nobody even knows where that number came from. For one, that will be an insane number of condoms, right? Just think about it. Do some back of the envelope math. There are 2 million people in Gaza, and and condoms, if you buy them, if you buy them in bulk at just like 100, I looked up the prices this morning. It's like 30 cents. If you bought $50 million worth of condoms, you could probably get them for lower than 30 cents per condom. But let's say it was like 20 or 30 cents per condom. That would be something like hundreds of millions of condoms. Why would anybody want to buy hundreds of millions of condoms for 2 million people? That just in 1 year, remember. That's just crazy. That's crazy. And the idea that there was not any more kind of investigation into that before you just throw it out into the public, that is crazy. That's crazy. Also, the USAID spent $8 million worldwide for condoms in 2023. And, maybe you think that's too much. Maybe you think it's not enough. I don't know. But how much money does it save us and the world on the back end by stopping unwanted pregnancies and stopping the spread of STDs across the world? I think probably more than $8 million worth of condoms if you were able to stop unwanted pregnancies and the spread of STDs. I think that's, probably worth it, maybe. I don't know. But there's just no commitment to the truth. No commitment to the truth. Here's the second one. Direct quote from his tweet. Reuters was literally paid by the federal government for, quote, large-scale social deception. Just simply not true. For one
Thomson Reuters Special Services was paid by the Department of Defense, not the news outlet. It was a Trump-era contract from 2018, and it was for researching defenses against deception, including like phishing attempts from people looking like attractive women while service members are overseas. Maybe that's a valuable use of resources. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But it was not the Department of Defense literally paying Thomson Reuters Special Services to deceive the public on a large scale. That's just, and he hasn't retracted that claim. And so, like, every single, there's, and no proof for any of the claims that they make. Also, this specific one was already publicly available. Like, you can just go and look and see that this Thomson Reuters Special Services, you can see the contract. You can just go and see it, right? And so you should not believe, frankly, anything that he puts out on Twitter, because there's no commitment to the truth and there is little ability to verify what he's saying. So it's not transparent, no commitment to the truth, et cetera, right? Conflicts of interest, all this kind of stuff. And now let's talk about the effects, some of the effects on working people. Thousands of probationary workers were let go across the government, more just working for the National Nuclear Security Administration, 325 workers, than every single trans athlete in the country in the NCAA. 10. Okay? That is crazy to let go of more people working to administer our nuclear security than there are trans athletes across the country. They were part of the 1,200 to 2,000 layoffs at the Department of Energy. There were also 400 workers let go at the Environmental Protection Agency, 1,000 workers let go at the Department of the Interior, 5,200 workers let go at the Department of Health and Human Services, 100 workers let go at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 2,400 workers at the U.S. Forest Service, 10% of its entire staff, 100 workers at the Small Business Administration, all probationary workers at NASA Ames in California. Huge effects on these people's lives. These people's who had wanted to serve the public, who had wanted to serve their government. It's just so gross what's going on. And so, like, the effect on federal workers is huge, obviously, but our inability to do our jobs, the people who've been literally let go, or the people who are having, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the new acting director, Russ Vought, literally told all remaining employees to just stop work on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Elon Musk wants to return the entire budget of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to the taxpayers. Guess what? The budget of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for this year is approximately $700 million. Every year, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau returns $1.4 billion to consumers. That is not a good return on investment, to return to the taxpayers $700 million when you could be getting $1.4 billion. And that's also not to that is also not even taking into account the number of the amount of money that is saved on the consumer end from companies not engaging in scams in the first place, because they know there's a cop on Wall Street there within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right? So $1.4 billion every single year returned directly to consumers from the corporations that scam them, plus who knows how many billions of dollars every year in scams that are not done because of the CFPB. And yet Russ Vought has just totally stopped all of that organization from working, despite the fact that this is a congressionally created thing on a bipartisan basis in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial crash. The UAW put out a statement on the cuts to the National Institute of Health. The Trump administration's decision to slash NIH funding is a gut punch to scientific progress, economic growth, and the fight against deadly diseases. Cutting research on cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's isn't efficient. It's economically reckless and inhumane. These cuts will shut down promising medical breakthroughs, slam the brakes on clinical trials, destroy jobs, and gut university research programs where thousands of UAW members across the country work every day to advance life-saving discoveries. Taking a step back from the press release for a second, slamming the brakes on clinical trials. This is something that's happened already with USAID. Thousands of people across the country have just been left hanging in the middle of medical trials. They volunteered for experimental treatment from the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is just leaving them with experimental medications and like medical devices in their bodies without following up with them, without removing it from them, without taking them out of, just leaving them hanging. Just leaving them hanging. This is affecting on just a huge scale. Back to the UAW. Trump claims this will save money, but the truth is every NIH dollar invested in research generates 2.5 times its value in economic activity. Gutting NIH funding is not savings, it's sabotage. That's absolutely true. And market fundamentalists, people who worship at the feet of the market, don't recognize that the vast majority of medical breakthroughs begin with federal government funding. And the federal government, studies things that may not have an immediate, or the government might be willing to study things that might not have an immediate economic value, but could produce results in the future. I mean, people are throwing out these NIH studies about, why would I want to study the spit of lizards or whatever? Well, guess what? That study, specifically, the spit of lizards, led to the creation of Ozempic, which has been hugely beneficial for millions of Americans. There was another one that was some kind of, studying animals or bugs or something that led to the creation of the mRNA vaccine, which has saved millions of lives, right? And so, just because you look at something and say, I have no idea how this would, impact anything. Well, you're not a scientist, right? I mean, you're not a scientist, so that's not your job, okay? But if you really want to go and investigate, go and investigate and actually do the research instead of just reading the top line incredulously and not understanding what's going on. But the federal government and the public sector has the resources and the ability to invest in these base level investigations into the natural world that the private sector in research and development might not be willing to do because it immediately needs to turn a profit. Otherwise, the private sector is not going to do it, right? The internet began from investments within the Department of Defense. I mean, farmers have been affected. This from Farm Progress. Resnick is a farmer who owns Butterbee Farms, a flower farm in Hartford County, Maryland. About a year ago, she signed a contract with the USDA's Rural Energy for America program to install solar panels. Per the agreement, Resnick received half of the promised funding up front. She would receive the remainder of the funding once the work was completed. As of January 1st, her solar panels were installed and functioning. Resnick's contract called for her to receive the balance of her allotted funding so she could pay the solar installation company for its work. That expected payment never arrived in her bank account. There are farmers all across the country who are dealing with stuff like that because of Trump. I mean, it is just so much. And we're going to continue to see stuff like this. I mean, the University of Alabama in Birmingham has been affected. Just on a massive scale, this kind of stuff is going to be really detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how it's good for the economy and good for consumption when thousands and thousands of people with decent jobs, right? Not extravagant jobs, they're public sector, but decent paying jobs with decent benefits. When those folks lose their jobs and therefore their purchasing power, I'm not sure how that actually helps the community. And that's before you even look at, like you said, the services that are being provided in many cases. So it's, I don't understand it. it does feel like a sabotage. To me, it feels like, the wealthy elites are really just taking the gloves off. And, it's been a long-term project of the far right to roll us back to the Gilded Age. And we already have Gilded Age levels of inequality in terms of the concentration of wealth. And we've seen, over the last several decades, wages have been stagnant while wealth continues to funnel to the top. Taxes have been slashed for the wealthy and corporations. And even that, not enough. It's just not enough. Record levels of inequality, and they want more. They want more, and they want to sabotage what little we have left of the social contract, what little we have left of, the New Deal order. It's a real shame. And I think it's up to all working people to remember that an injury to one is an injury to all. And whether it's a federal worker, whether it's an immigrant, whether it's a, trans person, whoever it is, an injury to one is an injury to all. That's really our mantra as a labor movement. We believe that because the vast majority of us have more in common with each other than we do with Elon Musk or Donald Trump or any of these kind of people. We're different. We have a different relationship to the economy and to production and to wealth and to power. And our power comes from coming together and uniting. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to stick up for the federal workers who are losing their jobs and for everyone else who's been, negatively impacted.
Exactly. I saw a comment in the chat about studying shrimp on a treadmill. So I just Googled it. I was like, what is that? Because remember, studying lizard spit is how we got Ozempic. And there was something else that if you read it in the most uncharitable kind of way and you don't do any kind of research into what's going on, there was some similar thing for the genesis of mRNA stuff. So I just Googled shrimp on a treadmill. This has apparently been going around for a long time. This is an article from 2011. So this is a very old talking point. But there was something that the spokesperson or the scientist talked about how the Senate's report was misleading, and it suggests that much money was spent on seeing how long a shrimp can run on a treadmill, which was totally out of context. The scientist said the first treadmill was built by a colleague from scraps and was basically free. The second was fancier and cost $1,000. The money went to a lot of different research that he and his colleagues did on economically important seafood species and the way that they react to water quality. So the treadmill part, and this is again just like last week, I spent 5 seconds on Google and I found out millions of dollars did not go to shrimp on a treadmill. It was part of a larger study about how seafood reacts to water quality, and the treadmill part of it was to see how their bodies react to different water qualities. That seems like something that's worth knowing. How does seafood react to water quality? That seems like something that's worth knowing. And if the treadmill costs $1,000, that doesn't seem unreasonable, right? And so as part of a larger study about water quality and its effect on seafoods, seems like shrimp on a treadmill might be a reasonable thing to look at. And that's why, the Doge Twitter thing is so stupid and misleading, because all it does is tweet out the headlines and you never see actually, what's the bigger point of it? Because newsflash, most people in the government, like most people in the private sector, and like most people generally, are also thinking like normal people. Normal people, right? And most people are not going to do things that are just completely ridiculous. Absolutely, completely ridiculous, okay? So if you hear something and you immediately think, that just does not sound like something that a thinking person would do, maybe spend 5 seconds on Google. We have a caller on the line, and I have been soliciting calls from federal workers. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857 is the number. Please do call in if you're a federal worker. I would love to hear how this kind of stuff is affecting you. How is the Trump administration affecting you personally? How is it affecting your ability to do work? How is it affecting your ability to execute the mission? How is it going to affect the American people who are going to see disruption in the services or the goods that you provide, et cetera, et cetera? How is your union reacting to this? How are your politicians reacting to this? How is your community reacting to this? Any and all of those sorts of things, I want to hear it from federal employees. 844-899-8857. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, and the lines are open. And we do have a caller on the line from a 301 area code. 301 area code. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, Jacob. My name is Matt Brown. I'm the recording secretary of NIH Fellows United, UAW Local 2750. We represent about 5,000 unionized researchers at NIH.
Fantastic, Matt. I'm so glad that you called in. And it's so funny that I was just talking about the science stuff. And somebody from the National Institute of Health calls in. What do you make, and this is before we get into any of this other stuff, but what do you make of it when people go around and cite these top lines of things without without knowing anything, frankly, like the shrimp on a treadmill, right? Like I just spent 5 seconds on Google and saw that, this was only a very small part of a general study about seafood quality or about the effects of water quality on seafood. That seems like a reasonable thing to study. Seems like something that we would want to know. What do you make of folks who do things like that?
Yeah, well, it's frustrating because obviously, like you pointed out, it's bad faith reading of the science that we do every day. And we work really hard. Our jobs are complicated. It's perhaps unsurprisingly not easy to try to solve things like Alzheimer's, heart disease, kidney disease, and diabetes. And all of those problems are made up of many, many, many smaller problems. And if you take those smaller problems and break them up and give them the least charitable reading possible, then yeah, they're probably going to sound a little ridiculous to people. And it's it can feel pretty insulting when that's done because, you know, we put our lives into this kind of research, and to have it described in these very uncharitable ways is, it doesn't feel great.
Yeah, and I have been following the NIH campaign at the UAW, and there's also this kind of misunderstanding that folks who work for the National Institute of Health make just a ridiculous amount of money. Would you mind telling people how much fellows at the National Institute of Health make?
It is not a ridiculous amount of money, I'll have you know. Our post-baccalaureate and pre-doctoral fellows are somewhere in the 50K range, and I myself, I'm a postdoctoral researcher. That means that I worked hard through my bachelor's degree, 2 years of being a lab technician, and then 6 years of a PhD, and I pull in around 70K a year, and that's that's I don't consider that extravagant, especially living here in the DC area. If you look at home prices and rent prices around Bethesda, where many of us work, 50K is barely enough to get by, and 70K, especially if you're in a position like a lot of postdoctoral fellows are, where they're trying to support families, it's certainly not extravagant.
Right. Yeah. $70,000 a year for a PhD holder is, that is not a lot of money, especially like you said, if you're living in the DMV area. So, the original solicitation of the calls was just generally, how is all of this? How is it affecting you? How is it going to affect the people that the services that you provide benefit? How's your union reacting, et cetera, et cetera. So, give me your response to any and all of those prompts that you want.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, at least on a personal level, I was fortunate enough to keep my job over this past week, but a lot of folks at the NIH weren't so fortunate. And as we well know, the intention behind all these cuts is not efficiency. It's not a good faith effort to give Americans the most bang for their buck of their tax money. Really, it's just a strategy to cause disorientation and chaos among the federal workforce. And what that means for researchers at the NIH, and not just researchers at the NIH, but all of the other important roles at the NIH, is that I worry that it could have this chilling effect on scientific research, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier in my call that, the problems that we try to solve at the NIH are really complicated, and they take years and years of many, many people's time to make any sort of progress towards cures or therapies for some of the diseases that we study. And my concern is that, with the chaos and disorientation that these unlawful terminations are causing, is that it will cause scientists to go, well, why bother? Why should I be the one to take on a multi-year project that will end up advancing Alzheimer's research? Why should I be the one to take on this huge, ambitious goal of solving type 1 diabetes when you don't know if the next person might come in and then just cut your job? And so that's one of my primary concerns about all of this, is that the hostility that's being shown towards federal workers right now is going to have this chilling effect on federally funded research, because people won't take on long-term ambitious projects if they don't know that the money's going to be there in a couple of years.
Exactly. And I was just having this conversation. I can't remember who I was having it with most recently, but I've had this conversation with a lot of people about how much of a waste it is that so many of the brightest minds in our country are working on things like how to make sure that there's enough air in a cheese puff that makes you want one more, right? People going into financial services and doing all of this kind of stuff. When obviously, like nobody would agree that, like, the scientists who work for Frito-Lay are doing the most kind of socially valuable thing they could be doing with their mind. But those types of jobs in the corporate world pay the most amount of money. You're going to make more money doing that than you would, presumably, working for the National Institute of Health. I'm sure that you've had kind of conversations with people as you're going through your education who may be going into those sorts of fields. And so, providing the kind of bare minimum security and foundation and economic, floor for people who do this kind of socially valuable research is the only way that we can keep at least some of our brightest minds doing something socially valuable, rather than making the most amount of money possible that they can. And so I guess how, I read from a press release of the UAW. What are some of the things that the UAW is doing to fight for their members and for the NIH generally?
Yeah, and so we're fortunate to be partnered up with the UAW, and luckily they're filing a lawsuit on our behalf, along with several other federal government unions. I would list them off the top of my head, but I don't want to leave any out. So it's the UAW in combination with a number of other federal government unions that are suing the administration and HHS over these cruel, unjust, and frankly unlawful terminations. But at least on the more local scale, it's great to have legal support from UAW International, but on the local scale, we've really just started organizing, right? Like that's what we had to do. We had to get boots on the ground. So we are actually joining in on this February 19th National Day of Action for Saving Our Services. And one of the ways that we're doing that is that we're actually hosting a rally in front of the Health and Human Services building on the 19th as part of this Save Our Services National Day of Action. And we reached out to our academic colleagues because science is a community, right? The research that gets done on the NIH campus in Bethesda affects the researchers at UC Berkeley, which affects the researchers at Harvard, which affects the researchers at University of Michigan. It's really it's a nationwide problem, all of these issues at the NIH. So we reached out to our union researcher colleagues around the DC area at the University of Maryland, Johns Hopkins, George Washington, and more. And we're going to get all of us out to the HHS building on February 19th to protest some of these horrible changes to the NIH.
Right.
All right. Well, Matt, with UAH or the UAW's NIH Fellows Union, thank you so much for taking the time to call in. Was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you left us with before we let you go?
No, just for any federal workers out there, know that you're not alone. It's been a tough couple weeks, but we're all fighting for each other here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We have another caller on the line. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you're a federal worker, please do give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. The number up next is 240 area code. Caller from a 240 area code. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm MT Snyder calling from San Francisco. I am a federal employee and wanted to call to talk about my experience dealing with all the attacks that Musk and Doge are launching at us right now.
Yeah, absolutely. MT, thank you for giving us a call. What are some of the top lines for you as you're kind of, looking at some of these attacks on federal workers?
Yeah, so I am a federal worker at the National Labor Relations Board in San Francisco. And so, my day-to-day job is making sure that workers have the right to ensure workplace democracy in most private sector workplaces. So whether that's voting for a union or engaging in group action to improve their working conditions, that's what I do day to day. And so these attacks, all these mass layoffs of probationary employees, and defunding agencies using our data and taking advantage of the data that we have. All of this is an effort to stop us from providing the services that we have, right? From workers being able to uphold their rights under the National Labor Relations Act, or from whether it's getting disaster relief, right, after a natural disaster, or care for veterans, healthcare. So I think that the most important thing to know right now is that what Musk and his team are doing is making all of our lives worse by impacting services that federal workers provide to the public, by taking away our jobs and our livelihoods and the services that Americans pay for and rely on every day.
Right. Absolutely. And I thank you for your service at the National Labor Relations Board, defending our rights as working people, particularly those in the private sector. Have they already fired probationary employees at the NLRB? I hadn't seen the NLRB in any of those releases.
No, not yet. And of course, I'm speaking in a personal capacity, not for my union or for my agency, but but we're waiting, right? We know that they're going very strategically agency by agency. And so I think that right now, all of my coworkers know that we need to be speaking up. We need to be organizing, getting in the streets, joining the Day of Action that's coming up on February 19th, where there's going to be rallies all across the country, and posting on social media about saving our services. I think that's really the emotions of what we're going through right now, is knowing that it's absolutely a crisis and we need to be speaking up to stop them, because we're the only ones that can.
I played a clip earlier in the program of Elon Musk where he talked about regulators and how there are just too many cooks in the kitchen. I mentioned that there are 24 workplace safety investigators in the state of Alabama for 2.2 million workers. So I figured I'd look up how many employees there were at the NLRB and how many workers there are in the United States. There are about 1,200 workers at the NLRB and about 161 million workers in the United States. That comes out to approximately 134,000 workers per NLRB employee. Do you think, are there too many workers at the NLRB enforcing workers' rights in the United States? Do you think it would be more efficient for you to be able to protect workers' rights if there were less of you?
That is, a really great question. And I think the answer to that is very easy, because for the past decade, the NLRB has been underfunded, and we've lost approximately, 50% of our field staff since 2010. However, the petitions and charges, unfair labor practice charges that we receive, again, since 2010, are at the same level, but we have half the staff to handle them. So what this means is that justice is delayed for workers everywhere. When they underfund us, when they cut our jobs, when they attack us, and we're workers too. So it impacts the broader public, and it impacts every federal worker.
Yeah. Well, MT, really appreciate your call. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we let you go?
Yeah, I just wanted to say again to everyone listening today, please check out go.saveourservices.com and sign up for the February 19th Day of Action. Post a photo of yourself wearing red, white, and blue with Save Our Services, the hashtag, and then check out a rally near your city and get out in the streets and join us together in stopping these attacks on working families everywhere by these billionaires.
All right. Thank you so much, MT. Really appreciate it. We have another caller on the line. This one is Anonymous. Anonymous, what's your name? You can give a pseudonym and where are you calling from?
Hey, my name's Mark, and I'm in the Midwest.
Mark in the Midwest. What's on your mind?
Yeah, so I'm a federal employee, and I have no problem with Doge investigating the waste and fraud within our agencies. And it's ironic that caller said wear red, white, and blue. You guys don't like the American flag at all. You actually defame it and face it. So the irony of doing that is just comical. I mean, you guys look like clowns. You're saying don't audit us. Stop. Don't look in here. Yes, you have, especially at the recent anti-ICE rallies. I mean, you guys are constantly stomping on the American flag. How about the BLM riots as well? You guys are stomping all over the American flag as well.
I don't know who is. I don't know who. I don't know who you guys are when you're saying this kind of stuff, but I have not. I have not ever done anything like that. I have. I actually have an American flag pin. I actually have an American flag pin that I wear on my suits sometimes, and so, I'm not totally sure. And I have actually on this program talked about. How I think there are really freaking cool things about the American experiment and that are really exciting, and how I am to a good extent proud to be an American, proud of the things that American people have done in our country, and proud to be an Alabamian, proud of things that Alabamians have done. Obviously not proud of everything, but I think that the legacy of the United States is a complicated one, and I think that you can kind of choose what you want to emphasize and stuff like that. So I don't think there's anything wrong. So being proud to be an American and stuff like that.
So are you familiar with when Obama said we need to investigate and audit our agencies? When Bush did this as well. Are you familiar with how the Democrat Party used to stand on all these issues? But then when the Republicans do it, it's like, oh no, don't look here, don't look in the closet, you can't look in there, don't audit us, stop. It's like, whoa, relax. We just want to see where the spending's going. We're an X amount of debt. There's nothing wrong with looking into the agencies. You guys are acting like children, and you're going to throw rallies and protests against this? This is pathetic. You guys, this is the hill you're dying on. This is why the Democratic Party is losing. We're doing an audit to investigate fraud and wasteful spending. And you guys are like, stop, you want bad.
Who's we, brother? I don't
Democrat
think you're
Party.
in the mix.
Yeah, what
you guys? And by the way, you guys have more billionaires than the Republicans.
We are auditing.
So stop that.
You aren't auditing anything, brother.
Yeah.
Besides our chat and our show, I guess. And we appreciate your engagement as always.
You're welcome. You guys need a little bit of a lesson taught here. I mean, you guys just say, "Oh, billionaire Musk." You guys have Bill Gates, George Soros. How come you never talk about your billionaire?
This show talked about Bill Gates and how his influence on the American education system has been poisonous. Literally, like 30 minutes ago. I think billionaires should not exist.
Oh, but those are.
And by the way, what a communist thought process saying billionaires should not exist.
I thought that you wanted to. Wait a second. Do you want us to criticize our billionaires, or so criticizing Bill Gates is communist?
No, you said we cannot have billionaires. Anything after this digit should be illegal. You said that.
Yes,
and
that's true.
No, we should. You should be allowed. You should be allowed to make as much money as you want. Yes, that would be imposing communist tactics and not have billionaires. Yes. In a capitalist society, you should be able to make as much as you can.
That's a good question.
China. I mean, that's the definition there.
Communism is
when China?
Oh.
Okay.
Do they have billionaires in
Well,
China?
I would use China as an example.
Yeah, Mark, do they have billionaires in China?
I'm sure they do.
Oh, okay.
I'm really lost.
So yeah, I'm
what's
lost.
your
Mark.
point?
Okay. I'm just really
Okay,
lost.
so
I'm
going
not
back
sure
to the
where you're
point.
going
Oh
with
no,
this.
don't audit us. Stop. Don't audit. Well, the point is, like, you guys are freaking out over being audited. Agencies, like, relax. Like, we're looking into fraud
Thousands of
investigation.
people have lost their
What's wrong with
jobs
that?
already, dude.
Yeah, so Mark, the problem with
Okay,
I mean, I
good.
feel like I have
Some
laid
of them
out.
shouldn't
Hold
have
on,
it
hold on.
then.
You asked me the question. Why are we? And it's a good question. This is a good question. I thought I answered it earlier, but it's a question. Why are we not happy with what Musk is doing with his Doge commission? And I laid out
Because
some
you
of
have
the
Elon
problems.
derangement syndrome.
Now hold on, Mark. I mean, you gotta let me respond. I laid out some of
Okay.
some of the reasons why. There are several. For one, it's actually not being transparent. There is not transparency with the Doge commission. There is not a commitment to the truth. I just talked about 2 instances where there was just total lies, and it's not there's no transparency. There's no commitment to the truth from this commission. It's also, I've talked about in the past, being led by, racist teenagers. I think that is a problem when you have racist teenagers auditing the federal government. I think there are better people to do that. And there are significant
They're not
conflicts
racist
of
teenagers.
we'll get back to that in just a second. There are significant conflicts of interest with Elon Musk and the agencies that he is wanting to quote unquote audit, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Aviation Administration, the National Labor Relations Board, all agencies that have credibly alleged that Musk's companies have been violating the law. And so he obviously has a conflict of interest there and an interest in impeding the functioning of these agencies. And so nobody is opposed to finding waste, fraud, and abuse. There are inspector generals, which was actually one of the first things that Donald Trump did, is he fired a lot of the independent inspector generals in violation of the law, which was admitted to by Lindsey Graham, of all people, that the way that he let these inspector generals go was illegal.
He's a rhino.
The problem with this is that it is not transparent. There's no commitment to the truth. There are conflicts of interest. They are getting rid of the people whose job it is to do this kind of thing, and they are misleading the public. They are also, in their quote-unquote audit, they are pausing things that are hurting people in this country and across the world, and they are cutting jobs that they have no idea what the ramifications would be, like cutting and like firing and then rehiring people who work at the National Nuclear Security Administration. So there are a lot of problems with the way that it's going on, and it is also in service of a broader narrative that the public sector and federal workers are generally more wasteful, etc., than the public sector or than the private sector, which is just obviously not true. We have 6 affiliate radio stations, and the owner of one of the affiliate radio stations has now for 2 weeks in a row had some sort of malfunctioning with their FM radio signal. And I talked to people who work for these radio stations, and I have had some of them talk to me, and I have never had a conversation with one person that I'm thinking of in my mind about the radio where he does not talk about how stupid and inefficient, etc., his private corporation is that he works for. And so it's just not a fact that the public sector and federal workers are less efficient and et cetera, than the private sector. And all of this is in service of that broader narrative. So there's lots of reasons that I have a problem with this specific thing that is happening. Nobody has a problem with identifying waste, fraud, and abuse, and there are lots of things that the federal government does that I would oppose. But the way that it is being done, the people that are doing it, is problematic. It is going to hurt people. It is hurting people, not just federal workers, but the people that we serve. And it's not going to be good for the country. Does that answer the question? I mean, just like seriously level with me, Mark. Does that not compute?
You have more of a reasonable mind than the typical protester of what I've seen in headlines. I'll give you that.
Well, then
but
why do
the
you
overall premise,
why do you lob these kinds of attacks, accusations at me and our program that you think exist? And I'm sure there are all sorts of crazy freaking people. Okay, I'm sure that some people actually believe the things that you think that we believe, but I know that you've been listening for a long time, and so like, why do you do that? Why do you do that? And with your admission that what I've just laid out is reasonable, I mean, I'm confused why you are so frustrated with our frustration.
Well, I think you just need to relax and let the audits go through. That's very normal. Let's have some transparency, and you can look what they're doing. You look at their X account on X, Doge, Department of Efficiency. You can look up what they're posting and sharing. They talk about it all the time. They're not hiding anything. And did we need 87,000 more IRS agents? Doubt it. Remember when the Biden administration took on 87,000 more?
Yeah, we do.
To go after, the small people? No, we did not need. Oh, my God. There's the hill you're going to die on. You're going to die on saying we need more IRS agents.
Well, let's talk about those two things that you mentioned there, the X account, the Twitter account, and the IRS agents. Okay, I just laid out how on Twitter there's like zero commitment to the truth, and there is very minimal ability to verify some of the things that they are saying. And then a lot of the things that you can verify was already public on usaspending.gov or whatever the website is. A lot of this is already public information that they are, it's not, it is just not this kind of great, this innovative thing that people are making out to be. It's repackaging already public information. And then secondly, the IRS agents. The IRS right now, I'm fairly confident, I've talked about this before, the IRS right now, I believe, and I caveat things when I'm not totally sure about it, but I believe that it has fewer employees now than it has in something like 50 years or a very long time. And what has happened as the IRS has lost employees is that it has a smaller percentage of the and the audits. We love audits now. We love audits. A smaller percentage of the audits that the IRS does has been in conjunction with the declining employment at the IRS. The percentage of the audits that the IRS does on wealthy people has also declined. Meaning that, and why that is that it is difficult to audit wealthy people, right? Because they have all sorts of people that can shield them from these sorts of things. And so you need more people to be able to perform these audits on wealthy folks. And so when you don't have enough people, then you go after the small fries who don't have those sorts of resources to fight back against the IRS. And so they go after so as the IRS has lost employees, the IRS has also been conducting a smaller and smaller percentage of these sorts of things on wealthy people. And so we need more audits on wealthy people, and so we need more IRS agents. Yes, I think that's true.
So just like how we need more audits to investigate agencies of government. Got it.
So we both agree. We need more IRS agents?
I wouldn't fully agree. I would want a full audit of the IRS first, which Doge is going to do. Then we'll take a look at it first.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the call, Mark. Appreciate it.
Audits are good. Let's have audits for businesses.
I agree audits are good, and we should have more audits of businesses, particularly wealthy people, particularly like Elon Musk, whose financial disclosures are not going to be made public, despite the fact that he's rummaging around through the entire United States government.
And also Democrat billionaires as well.
We should have audits of all of this kind of stuff, but I do not
Elon Musk used to be a Democrat.
Elon Musk. I do not trust Elon Musk to do these audits because of his past, interactions with the law. I do not think he is trustworthy, and because of his behavior with this Doge Commission, he has not proven himself trustworthy to conduct these sorts of things.
Would you trust him if he was a Democrat? Would you trust him if he had a D in front of his name?
No, you just heard me talking about how
I bet you would.
I don't think that Bill Gates should have $1 billion, and I think that Bill Gates has had a malevolent influence on this society. I was talking about how problematic Elon Musk was 3 or 4 years ago when he was union busting at Tesla, when he was still, by and large, perceived as a Democrat. I am unlike Mark. I think that you see the world first through politics and republicanism and conservatism. And I see the world first through as a member of the working class. Okay? And so we just and so I do not take a look at somebody, what letter they have next to their name, and decide if I'm going to think they are good or not because of that letter. Literally, the Alabama Democratic House Minority Leader, the leader of the Democrats in the Alabama State House, has me blocked on Twitter because of questions that I have asked him. Okay? I have zero loyalty to any sort of political party in the United States. I do not care. I care about working people, and Democrats and Republicans can both go pound sand as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think, it does not appear to me that you have like a similar engagement.
Who did you vote for?
I voted for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that says a lot. So you like Tim Walz and you like tampons in the boys' bathroom?
This is
You're okay with that policy?
We're talking. Also, I can also recognize, which apparently, because I voted apparently differently than you, you cannot hold, you can't hold two thoughts in your mind, right? I can believe that a person who voted for Donald Trump can have problems with this or that or the other thing that Donald Trump doesn't, and doesn't have to be a necessarily completely lockstep with the Republican agenda. I can believe that. And also, I can believe that people who vote for Democrats don't fall lockstep and with the Democratic agenda. I voted for Democrats. I voted for Republicans. I voted for libertarians before. Okay, and so I do what I think in all portions of my public life and my activism and my work within the union and everything like that. I try to do things that benefit working people. And I came to a different calculus than you on that one thing in 4 months ago. I think that after the past 3 weeks, I think that there's reason to believe that my choice made sense. But I mean that who I voted for has no bearing on this conversation that we're having.
Right. Well, let the audits flow.
All right, we'll pray for you, brother. Take care. Be safe on your route.
I'll pray for the Democratic Party as well, because we're going to find out where
need
the
prayers.
They could freaking use it. They could freaking use it. Thanks for your call, Mark. Appreciate it. We've got another caller on the line. We're a little bit over, but we'll go ahead and take this call, and then we'll wrap up. This caller's from a 510 area code. 510 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi there, it's Mark Smith calling. I'm calling from San Francisco. I'm work at the Veterans Health Administration out here.
A different Mark, this one from San Francisco, not from the Midwest, work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Appreciate you calling in. I'm assuming you were calling in to talk about the effect of the Trump administration and everything on your work serving veterans. And so we've been posing this question to federal workers. You know, how is it affecting you and your coworkers, like personally and interpersonally? How is it affecting your ability to execute the mission? How is it affecting or going to be affecting the people that you serve, et cetera, et cetera? How is your union responding? All that kind of stuff. So respond to any and all of that, or just one of those things. Take that kind of general prompt wherever you'd like. Mark, thanks for calling in.
Sure. Yeah. I'll say I think it's been affecting our union members who are nurses and psychologists and social workers and rehabilitation professionals. at the Veterans Health Administration, there's just been so much chaos and turmoil. There was a hiring freeze, and then it turns out a week later we're exempted from the hiring freeze, but still the job offers are rescinded, and it's been difficult to get staff on board. We were already in a staffing crisis, and folks, there's just been a ton of stress and anxiety that it seems unnecessary. And I don't know about you, but when I go to the doctor, when I go to see my healthcare provider, I don't want them to be stressed out and anxious and worried about their job and the future. I want them to be thinking, laser focused on my care. And right now, it's really difficult to do that, I would say, at the Veterans Healthcare Administration. We've had, mass layoffs. There was 1,000 folks let go just this week. And, they said that, these are not frontline staff, but I'll tell you what. So I'll give you a specific example of how that impacts veteran care. We have a veterans crisis line that, thousands of veterans call in regularly, in suicidal crises to talk to somebody. And, we're already, I would say, understaffed, and many of our psychologists and social workers and folks like that who handle some of these veterans who are in suicidal crises are already understaffed and feeling burned out and struggling to keep up with the load. But now several of their support staff on that veterans crisis line were given termination notices, right? So these are the folks that, help handle the calls or transfer the calls to emergency and things like this. So that's just one example of how some of these really ill-considered and hasty, chaotic cuts impact real people and veterans and the folks who take care of veterans. Those are some of the ways that we've been, affected, even if it hasn't been sort of a mass layoff or things like that in the Veterans Health Administration.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate the call, and I guess how is the community responding, and the people that you serve? Are they mentioning anything like that I appreciate you, I'm sorry for what's going on, or is there any kind of recognition of what's happening among your patients and the people that you serve yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really special kind of relationship at the VA between patients and providers. Many, staff are veterans themselves. Over close to 30% of Veterans Affairs employees are veterans themselves, right? So most folks who are there for the mission. They care about taking care of veterans, and veterans know that. And so, yeah, certainly patients have been talking to staff and just saying, hey, we appreciate the work that you do, and please stick it out and hold the line, and don't leave, because there's a shortage of healthcare providers everywhere in America, and many of our doctors and nurses and psychologists and social workers and everyone else could go somewhere else and make more money and probably have a less chaotic and stressful workplace at the moment, and so that has been really appreciated to see veterans, and veterans groups expressing some of that appreciation for their care providers.
What about your union? How's your union responding to this kind of stuff?
So at the national level, obviously our union is taking legal actions as necessary to protect us and folks who have been, illegally terminated or otherwise harmed by some of the chaotic actions of the current administration. Locally, folks are joining the union in droves. So we've had more folks sign up for the union in the last week or so than in the past 6 months. And people are just really learning about how unions protect us as working people. Even if we're in, a federal workplace that historically has been, a pretty decent place to work, people are seeing that, this is what a union is for, right? It's when you have a bad boss and you need to get together and act collectively to protect yourselves and to protect the working conditions that we need, right? We say, we were kind of inspired by teachers unions when they say that their working conditions are their students' learning conditions. Similarly, in healthcare, our working conditions are our patients' healing conditions. And so people are realizing that a union or the power of a collective bargaining agreement is one of the only things that, we have as working people to kind of stand up and protect those things that we need to take good care of our patients. So that's really been educational for folks, I think, in the last few months here.
Right. We've seen here, Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, similar increase in union membership. My union, AFGE Local 1858, has seen a minimum of a 20% increase, although that increase in membership was given to me like a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, so it's probably more than that, but 20%, now at 1,000 members, up from 800. The Rocket Scientists Union at NASA has seen a 50% increase in membership. Presumably the NIFI local here has seen a similar increase, although I haven't heard from the president there. Need to get her to call me back, but I'm sure she's super busy. So yeah, that is the one kind of silver lining, is that we are seeing a lot of federal workers join their unions, and so I'm glad that that's happening over there. Mark, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that folks knew about, the work that you do in the Veterans Administration, or how it's affecting your work, or anything else at all before we let you go?
I would just say that folks. The VA won't be around forever if we don't protect it and try to fend off these attacks to privatize and outsource it. This is not a new thing. It's just gotten worse with the current administration. But under, to speak to the previous caller's comments, it's been under both a Republican and Democrat appointees and Congress that, the privatization and outsourcing of veterans healthcare has been increasing. We're spending almost 40% of our direct care budget now on outsourced care. And, they talk about choice and having choice in healthcare, but, eventually veterans will not have a choice. There will only be the private sector, because we can't keep staff and keep our facilities running when we don't have the budget and staff to do it. So I would say that folks need to take a look at the Veterans for Peace Save Our VA campaign website. They can go there and get action alerts and follow, what's going on with veterans healthcare and how they can support VA healthcare workers and make sure that we have this fantastic healthcare system for years to come.
Thanks for the call, Mark. I appreciate it.
We
had somebody in the chat say that other caller will keep calling in every week until you stop him, and he isn't going to add anything useful to the group or conversation. He might do that. I wouldn't take his call every single week, but at least if he calls in rather than doing it in the chat, he's giving us content. So I'm fine with him calling in as much as he wants. I wouldn't take his call every single week if it does continue, every single week. But we get. We're on 2 conservative radio stations. We get surprisingly few conservative angry callers, right? Which I think does kind of speak to the unifying kind of message, I think, generally speaking, that we have, which is not focused on, politics or, that kind of stuff. It's focused on, what unifies people as the working class and how we can support one another and things like that. and how it's important to support one another. We don't endorse in elections and things like that. He asked me who I voted for. I told him that wasn't a recommendation to vote anyway or anything like that. But we don't endorse. We've never used our program to do that, and so I think that the fact that we get so few conservative callers, I think is interesting and hopefully is speaks to the value of our program. We don't have any more callers on the line, so if you missed, you can leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. Anytime throughout the week. We really appreciate y'all hanging out with us. It's enjoyable doing this. It's really, I mentioned that my program manager was let go. I'm probably the program that I'm a part of is going to get axed completely. And so I'm looking at, being let go at any time now. And so, the past week in particular has been very difficult for me in my house. And so, being able to, it's kind of cathartic being able to do this kind of stuff. I deployed for the Corps of Engineers to New Orleans for a month to support hurricane recovery efforts after Hurricane Ida several years ago. And so I was gone for a month and I wasn't on the radio for a month, and I was like, oh, wow. I really, really missed doing this. It's kind of therapeutic a little bit, being able to yell at things that make me angry once a week. So I appreciate y'all letting me do this and finding some value in it, hopefully. So appreciate everybody tuning in, and looking forward to talking to you next week. Adam, do you have any other plugs?
No, just really appreciate all the support, and please do leave a voicemail throughout the week. Let us know what's going on. If you've got a bad boss story, if you were a federal worker experiencing, these cuts, if you've got a protest or an event or an action or anything that you just want to let folks know about, feel free to give us a call, leave a voicemail, 844-899-TVLR. And really appreciate all the support, everybody.
That's going to be it for us on the show this week. Tune in next week, and find us online, TVLR.fm, wherever you get your podcasts, Facebook, YouTube, all of that good stuff. See you next week. All power to the workers.